401. Brothers and sisters, beloved relatives and friends. Brothers and sisters, beloved relatives and friends. The air in Egypt was pleasantly cool, teens on the thermometer, neither hot nor bitterly cold, but Ted barely noticed. He stepped out of the fireplace and hardly had a chance to savor it before greeting the man sitting across the table. "Professor," Ted said with an easy smile, spreading his hands. "Long time no see." Grindelwald inclined his head. "Indeed, it's not often we get to see you." It wasn't just chance. Dumbledore had been trying to keep Ted isolated, and Ted himself had avoided unnecessary meetings for fear of stirring suspicion. Grindelwald had watched Ted closely. After all, he'd observed the Triwizard Tournament from the sidelines and had spent months at Hogwarts last year. He knew Ted's habits and weaknesses. When his informant sent him a name, Fleur, Grindelwald's interest sharpened. He let the remark sit a moment before speaking of her. "That girl," he said, "and a few young companions broke into that pyramid. It's not a tourist site. There are people from a dozen factions inside, probably over 100. Ted shrugged. "So what do you want me to do, Professor?" Grindelwald smiled in a way that always pleased him. He loved finding courage and vanity in students. Stories always have the hero saving the beauty, don't they? "All right, then I'll go," Ted said. "Take care," Grindelwald added. Ted knew Grindelwald had a purpose in drawing him out, but that could wait. He needed to find Fleur first. He stepped toward the path that led to the pyramid. Inside the ancient tomb, the first wave of intruders had been overconfident. In the beginning, it had been nothing. Old mechanisms and crude traps that killed the reckless and cleared a path. A few dozen mercenaries, smugglers, and scavengers paid with their lives, and the rest pushed on, greedy for jewels, frescoes, and statues. Some tried peeling murals with industrial tape. Others began heaving off small sculptures. That arrogance woke the pyramid. A painted woman on a wall turned her head. Looters looking at her glassy-eyed pulled knives and slaughtered each other. A statue's stone hand came alive and shattered a skull. Those prying out gems found their fingers blackening, agony racking them as their skin shriveled into something no human form should be. The tomb's ancient, sacrificial magic stirred after 1,000 years of sleep. The professionals fared better. From the United States came the Seven, a team hired by a corporate power called the Vought Group, an organization born, in rumor and half-truth, from a strange interdimensional contact. The corporation had found and cultivated people with strange abilities, turning oddities into assets. The Seven were chosen from those recruits, 5 men and 2 women, each with a distinct gift and the personal baggage that so often came with sudden power. There was C, the man with gills under his ribs who could talk to fish. Fast legs, a black man with speed exceeding a cheetah. Starlight, a white woman who radiated blinding light and shockwaves and whose physical strength outmatched most powered folk. Iron Man, a heavily built black man who could turn his skin into iron, rendering him nearly impervious and monstrously strong. Midnight Muse, a tall, imposing black woman whose voice could seduce and whose hearing extended into ultrasound and infrasound. She could also unleash devastating sound attacks. The Invisible Man could render himself unseen and deform his shape to squeeze through impossible gaps, a consummate peeper. And Newt, the team's poster boy, could fly and had strength, speed, and durability far beyond normal humans. They wore advanced, protective uniforms and moved through the upper reaches of the pyramid almost untouched by traps. But they were heading the wrong way. Their route led upward toward the pharaoh's funerary chamber, while more locally knowledgeable groups pushed down into the sealed burial levels. Local Egyptian wizards had an advantage. 12 of them, including a pair that ran an online presence, an Egyptian witch steeped in inherited lore and Egyptian magic, slipped through the maze with skill. Goblins were there too, numerous but quickly reduced. Grindelwald had sent ambushers, and old grudges among wizards and goblins turned fierce. The goblins' archaeological habits, dig everything, take everything, kill everything, made them enemies in every camp, and they bled members within hours. Deeper in, venomous, magically enhanced creatures swarmed. Decay curses activated beneath feet, and the party learned quickly how dangerous the place could be. Iron Man fused his leg to iron to stop the curse's spread, but he limped afterward. Starlight and Midnight Muse cleared swarms with light and sound. and mummy guards took hours to bleed back into dust after being broken. The Seven's cohesion frayed in the maze. Fast legs, looking at a mural, suddenly snickered and instantly vanished, swept off by the controlling magic. The others debated. "Do we search?" Iron Man asked. "Where for?" C grunted. He didn't want wasted time. Starlight, unofficially half in charge while Newt was absent, insisted on the objective. Midnight Muse bristled. She'd been sidelined socially on the team, and it showed in her temper. They pressed onward to retrieve whatever the corporate bosses wanted. Fleur and her small band, new wizards, barely out of their training, moved cautiously. Fleur, recently of age, regretted dragging novices into the tomb. They disarmed several traps and handled minor hazards, but the maze confounded them. Progress was slow and careful. Safety, not speed, guided them. Ted arrived more than an hour after the first groups had stormed the entrance. He tried to contact Fleur, but the pyramid's magic carved out a self-contained space. The magical web wouldn't penetrate, and mental powers were suppressed. He released a cloud of tiny, reconnaissance insect puppets and watched them fan out. Then the ground shuddered. A deep, dull rumble rolled through the masonry. Stone that had seemed seamless began to shift. The incident began with the Invisible Man. He'd been skulking beneath a golden statue, trying to steal a glimpse beneath the folds of a gilded skirt, when he triggered a hidden mechanism. That set the chamber in motion. Walls started to close, and a golden sarcophagus began to sink, as if into quicksand. Iron Man, seeing the coffin slide away, lunged and grabbed it. The others swarmed, prying it open. A cloud of black gas burst from the coffin like living shadow and wrapped itself around the intruders. C screamed as his eyes bubbled with blood and decay. He fumbled at a can at his belt and shoved seawater into his face, stanching the worst, but his sight went dark. The Invisible Man, revealed now as a scrawny, lecherous white man in his 40s, convulsed, bleeding from nose and mouth, crippled by the impact of falling statuary. The black gas didn't stop with them. It slid into ears and nostrils, tricked and evasive. Iron Man closed his eyes and tried to stand firm, but the smoke divided and bored into him. He fell, hands clawing at his head, muscles seizing. Starlight reacted with trained caution. Her body flared with light and pushed at the black fumes, clearing a space around her. Midnight Muse, not one for effort unless paid to, bolted for the nearest opening as the walls tightened. Starlight, torn between fleeing and helping her fallen teammates, sprinted past a toppled goddess statue, grabbed a gilded plate from beneath it, and bolted through the shrinking gap. Money, even now, outweighed mercy. By the time the sarcophagus slid into the sand and vanished, the chamber had begun to collapse inward, hidden doors sealed, and the maze readjusted. Ted watched the stone shift and the trapped fragments of the pyramid reveal themselves. The bodies, the living, the injured. He let his reconnaissance bugs spread to gather names, positions, conditions. Arriving late, he thought, was sometimes best. He smiled and stepped into the opening the moving walls had made. Better to get there at the right moment than to be early, he murmured, and moved deeper into the tomb. 402. The dead are resurrected and disaster strikes. Hello. Ted called to the small group about 20 meters away. They were a handful of men in camouflage, carrying long guns, and a man in a suit who looked like their leader. All of them looked battered, as if beaten by a dozen muscular men. 2 of them had cuts on their faces. One was already lying on the ground. Ted could sense from his mind that he was in the last few seconds of life, watching memories flash before him. Ted barely registered it. He offered a casual greeting. Whether from shock or because they intended to eliminate any competitors, 2 of them suddenly raised their guns and fired straight at him. The bullets, a meter from Ted, hit an invisible resistance, as if they had plunged into glue. They hung in the air, rotating slowly, unable to move forward. 20-30 rounds hovered there, a surreal sight. Tsk, local gang, how rude. Ted waved his hand and pushed a force outward. The bullets burst backward, slamming into their shooters. Blood spattered. The men collapsed. A few turbaned, bearded, local-looking men farther off, more like scavengers, stared, frozen. They had also been staring at the crawling statue with the broken legs nearby, but forgot it the moment they saw Ted. The leader of the turbaned group immediately dropped his pistol and threw up his hands. "Sir, don't shoot! We're locals! We mean no harm. We're polite. Don't shoot!" Ted felt a moment's surprise at the accent, then waved a hand. The bearded man, who had kept his hands raised, drifted unsteadily toward Ted as if some unseen compulsion carried him. He cried out once, then went rigid, clearly mesmerized. Ted's eyes glowed for a second, and the man's consciousness fell blank. Ted searched the man's memory without much effort. No wonder he had been so deft earlier. He hadn't been a professional soldier at all, but a scavenger from Algeria, a former French colony, still with strong French influence. These men had been hired by someone from Egypt, but seeing opportunity in the pyramid, they decided to go rogue. No loyalty. The bearded man even had 2 gold trinkets he'd looted from a pyramid pocket. "Listen, obey me, or die," Ted said. "Understood, understood. Anything you say, sir. You're God's messenger." The bearded man adapted quickly, kneeling and flattering himself into immediate obedience. Ted found himself a little amused. With that, he had 6 desperate scavenger mercenaries subdued, 3 long guns, 2 pistols, and a few machetes between them. He glanced at their rifles, relic AKs 20 years old. The bearded scavenger rushed to take credit and thrust passports and wallets at Ted. "Do as you will," Ted said, waving them off. He'd already noticed something strange. At the moment of death, the souls of these people were being taken by an unknown force in the pyramid. People ran in here to be sacrifices. That was why Ted hadn't just killed the scavengers outright, partly because they were sensible enough to kneel and flatter, and partly because he didn't want to be used as someone else's instrument. This pyramid hid an ugly secret. Information from the little flying insect puppet reached him in 3 minutes. The yellow sand beneath Ted's feet liquefied into a circular sheet of glass that lifted him into the air like an elevator. Watching him fly away, the scavengers gaped, terrified. 2 of them immediately dropped to their knees and began to chant, while the leader, more pragmatic, kicked the one who was praying and barked, "Move, follow." A scavenger who had worked North Africa for over 10 years knew enough about the world to recognize extraordinary individuals when he saw one. The statute of secrecy was more loosely enforced in some parts of Africa. In such a deadly place, meeting someone like Ted could mean life or death, so they ran after him like men possessed. When Ted arrived at the skirmish, 3 groups were in a tense standoff. Fleur stood with 2 young men and a young woman. Opposite them stood 3 turbaned Middle Eastern wizards. Among them, to Ted's surprise, was a familiar face, the Ouagadougou champion from the Tri-Wizard tournament, a witch who could transform into a dolphin and a leopard. Everyone jokingly called her Leopard Girl. Like Fleur, Leopard Girl had been supervising 2 junior students who were now caught up in this. As Ted approached, he realized the pyramid itself was subtly dangerous. It gave a faint, persistent suggestion. First curiosity about the monument, then an escalating compulsion to go closer, then to enter. Coupled with whatever sacrificial setup was here, that influence was insidious. No wonder so many people had rushed in. Below them, bodies were already shriveling into mummies. Ted eyed the scene from above. Besides Fleur's group and Leopard Girl's party, there were the turbaned Middle Eastern wizards, about 4 of them, strong, around level 10. These wizards specialized in astrology. A diviner had foretold a great treasure here, and they'd come to try their luck. There were also 5 goblins, short, pointed ears, long noses, ugly, wearing strange metal trinkets and magical devices. The goblins glared at everyone with ferocity and hatred. Surrounding the 3 groups was a tide of monsters, animated statues, painted skins torn from murals, and a huge number of mummy guards. The mummies wore decayed armor, skeletons shrouded in skin, brandishing scimitars and executioners' blades. A few painted statues were inlaid with gems, but even the best of them were only level 4 or 5. The most numerous were level 5 Pharaoh Guard mummies, 50 or 60 of them, plus a dozen level 7 Pharaoh Imperial Guard mummies, some mummy cavalry, and even a mummy on a chariot who looked like a general. A level 11 Pyramid Guard general. There were mummy dogs, jackals, crocodiles, and over 100 decaying mummies staggering about. The pyramid owner had certainly been buried with plenty. The 3 groups were forced into an uneasy alliance, back to back, barely holding the ring. Ted's descent drew attention. Before he even touched down, bone arrows loosed from the lines. He waved his hand and knocked them aside. "Ted?" Fleur cried. "You saved us!" Leopard Girl brightened. Ted's reputation among wizards of that age was considerable. The Triwizard Tournament had made him famous. "Why are you here? This pyramid is dangerous. You should leave," Ted warned. Immediately, the goblins reacted. Ted's notoriety among goblins went even further than among wizards. The Goblin Revenge Army had put a high bounty on him, second only to the top tier. After the Triwizard Tournament, they'd held a grudge, vowing to eliminate him lest he grow too powerful and threaten their plans. Two leading goblins exchanged looks and struck. One of them lifted his wand under his robe, while the other activated a device on his wrist. "Avada Kedavra! Flame Ray!" someone shouted. A green and a red beam slammed into Ted, tearing through him. Then, as if the attack had never happened, he reassembled in a blur 2 paces away, whole. The goblins were stunned. The one who had cast Avada Kedavra tried to chant again, but mid-spell an invisible hand seized his throat and hoisted him into the air. His wand flew from his grip. To everyone's eyes, he grabbed his own throat and choked himself until his eyes rolled back. "Goblins are not allowed to carry wands. Ice hell," Ted muttered, clenching his fist. Huge spikes of ice, 3 or 4 meters long, burst from the sand beneath the goblins and impaled them. The blood froze instantly. In moments, 5 goblins, all roughly level 10, were dead. Lately, Ted had learned a great deal about water manipulation and had been converting that skill into ice magic. The flow between water and ice was seamless. He could shape it at will. The effect was devastating. The sight stunned everyone. They'd known he was exceptional during the tournament, but watching him kill so casually and decisively left them speechless. The turbaned wizards made a quick decision and fell in behind Ted. He raised his wand and called water into being midair. It coalesced and swirled. "Hold on," he ordered. A giant wall of water rose above the yellow sand, a wave more than 5 meters high, surging forward. Mummies and statues were swept over, thrown head over heels. Even the painted stone figures were toppled. Everyone rode the wave, racing over a kilometer, scooping up the scavengers as they flew toward the pyramid's exit. The pyramid's entrance had sealed. Ted used an extreme Defindo 5 strike and blew through the 2-meter-thick stone. Sunlight flooded in. At the opening, Ted ran straight into Gellert Grindelwald and his party, or perhaps Grindelwald had been waiting there. "You're quick," Grindelwald said and waved. 5 or 6 older wizards stepped forward toward Ted's group. "These students were only interning here," Ted explained. "They got caught up in this by accident." "Of course, young people should travel, but be careful in the future," Grindelwald replied. As he spoke, Grindelwald's senior wizards bypassed Fleur and Leopard Girl and disarmed the turbaned wizards, taking their wands. The turbaned men submitted. They were the de facto Egyptian ministry presence in this tomb now, and their arrest looked legitimate. A few scavengers even dropped the guns they'd managed to pick up. "Want to come with me to take a closer look?" Grindelwald offered. "Sure," Ted agreed. "You all go rest first," he told Fleur and the others. Fleur tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "We'll be waiting for you." Inside the pyramid, the rival groups had pushed to the farthest underground chamber and found a stone coffin sealed beneath massive stones carved with ferocious deities. A dozen goblins glared across the coffin. The two sides had already fought once with indecisive results. The treasure, or something very valuable, sat within reach, and neither side dared move rashly. They weren't confident, but the survivors trapped inside the pyramid were dying fast. The place felt like a lethal mechanism designed to consume intruders. One by one, the sacrifices the pyramid demanded were being consumed. Except for Ted and the group he led out, the rest were trapped, lingering until death took them. That included some from the 7. In a corner stood Starlight, the white woman, together with a large black woman, fat and badly injured, a fist-sized wound in her side, bleeding steadily. Fast Legs, the black man whose mind had been warped by the murals, had changed completely. His eyes were rolled back, his face had twisted, his skull seemed deformed, his back arched into a hunch. He was no longer rational. He had ambushed the two. Starlight, fleet-footed, dodged. The fat woman had tried to counterattack and had been sliced across the waist. If it had been anyone else, the injury would have been much worse. "Starlight, please don't leave me. I know I wasn't good before, but I'll listen to you from now on. Help me," the fat woman begged, face slick with sweat. The wound wasn't instantly fatal, but in this place, with the pyramid's horrors everywhere, staying meant certain death. Starlight was merciless. She held a thick golden plate stamped with arcane symbols and backed away. "No, don't!" the fat woman screamed, but Starlight continued retreating. The injured woman shrieked, and a shrill attack of sound washed toward Starlight. Prepared, Starlight activated a small device on her body. Interfering frequencies neutralized the scream long enough for her to flee to a corner. The injured woman struggled to stand, dragging herself on trembling legs, blood trailing behind her. From the darkness, a pair of pale white eyes fixed on her. Fast legs moved like a shadow. One hand had fused with a scimitar, flesh wrapped around the hilt, leaving the blade exposed. He lurched forward, became an afterimage, and struck from behind. When the fat woman died, fewer than 5 people remained alive in the pyramid outside the 2 groups at the bottom, Starlight among them. With her death, something shifted, as if a condition had been fulfilled. The 2 groups by the stone coffin suddenly watched the massive carved stones begin to weather and crumble. The sculpture's edges turned to sand and fell like dust. Someone with sharp eyes noticed a black stone tablet among the drifting grit. That sight was like a gunshot. Both sides opened fire. Spells of every color, flames, explosions, wind blades filled the chamber. In the frenzy, people slipped up, several fell. Within a minute, 4 more were dead. The obsidian tablet had become the object of the struggle. A stray spell struck it and glanced off harmlessly, only knocking it aside. Everyone breathed. The tablet slid to the feet of the young couple who'd been on the sidelines. The American boy, Slada, reached for it instinctively, but his girlfriend yanked him back. "Are you crazy? Don't touch that!" she hissed. Even so, curiosity overcame her, and she leaned forward to read the symbols. A soft sentence escaped her lips. "The wind of revival blows beneath the yellow sands. The sacrifice is complete, and the departed souls shall return." Her voice was barely a whisper, but as she spoke, a crack opened in the stone coffin. Outside, the afternoon sun, at 3 o'clock, darkened as if someone had set a red film over it. The sky went a bruised, bloody red. The Nile nearby began to boil. Frogs and crocs flung themselves at the banks. Swarms of locust nymphs crawled from the soil and shuddered into adulthood. Dark clouds thickened. Hail the size of eggs began to slam down. A shriveled mummy pushed up its coffin lid and rose, surrounded by black smoke. Disaster had come. "Don't wait, brother, brother, pigeon, pigeon, pigeon. Don't wait, brother, brother, pigeon, pigeon, pigeon." I was engrossed in reading. The Red Chamber Scholar is an excellent book. I recommend it to everyone. 404. Just a toy. 404. Just a toy. Bang! A dried corpse hit the ground. Another wizard had been drained and died. The mummy that had crawled out of the stone coffin was now noticeably fuller. Black smoke clung to its body. Even when struck by a spell, it only hesitated for a moment. It moved like a sandstorm, faster than anyone expected, seizing a person in the blink of an eye, dragging them to its mouth, and sucking them dry until nothing remained but a desiccated husk. The wizards who had been strutting around the chamber were now no stronger than civilians. Protective magics, shield charm, and other warding spells were shattered with a single grasp, utterly ineffective. The goblins fared no better. 4 or 5 of them were already dead, reduced to under a meter in height by the same draining. When the mummy first appeared, it had been shriveled, worse than poorly preserved meat. After feeding on a dozen or so wizards, it had plumped out. Aside from some still shriveled skin, pitted cheeks, and a slightly damaged forehead, it looked almost human. A bald, middle-aged man in a robe of black smoke. The mummy had been resurrected. This notorious criminal's return had been tied to strange phenomena along the Nile. Magic fluctuating wildly, animals going mad or dying, rivers flooding, locusts blotting the sky, sandstorms, apocalyptic signs. The mummy itself wasn't necessarily causing celestial anomalies at will. Something was wrong with the pyramid. Grindelwald, who had been watching in secret for days, had suspected as much. The structure appeared to be a magic fluctuation amplifier, like a colossal magical artifact or a magical building, perhaps even a wonder, and the anomalies that attended the mummy's revival were built into it from the start. It felt less like a place meant to suppress the dead than a place that had been prepared, generation after generation, to ensure the day of the mummy's resurrection. Seeing only a few wizards left alive deep inside the pyramid, a young online couple, holding hands, tried to slip away quietly. The mummy flowed into a gust of sand and blocked their route. Slotta shoved the girl aside when the mummy reached for her. "Run!" he shouted, raising his wand to cast. But even the wizards who had tried attacking before had failed. The mummy's surrounding sorcery defeated or deflected their spells with ease. If a spell did land, it only made a hole, temporary, and the mummy would simply come back after draining another victim. In game terms, this mummy was at level 19. The wizards around level 10 were hopelessly outmatched. Just as the tall mummy clamped down on Slotta's throat and drew him in, the girl screamed. Strange, archaic words tumbled from her mouth. The mummy paused and then replied in the same tongue. The girl's family were among the few indigenous descendants of ancient Egyptians, not Arabs, and she had spoken the old priestly language without expecting the creature to understand. She desperately begged for mercy and offered to defect, to become a traitor to the wizarding order. Grindelwald arrived at that moment. He glanced coldly at the mummy, now almost human in appearance, then down at the girl kneeling in the dust. "I think it's better not to be a traitor," he said. The bald man's skeleton had already sensed Grindelwald's power. He casually dropped Slotta and fixed Grindelwald with a solemn gaze. Fine sand began to blow through the chamber like dust, and a ring of azure flames flared around Grindelwald. At the same time, Ted was not with Grindelwald. Though they had entered the pyramid together, they split up with different objectives. Grindelwald went deeper. Ted headed upward. Ted hadn't yet found his target when he unexpectedly ran into a blonde Caucasian woman. Though battered and with a torn uniform, she still looked like someone used to having ample resources. "Help! Help me!" Starlight cried to the handsome young man before her. This was a wizard's attire she was wearing. She clung to him like a drowning woman to a lifeline. If he could buy her a little time, that was all she needed. Ted smiled. "Madam, don't panic. You're safe." "Thank you." Starlight collapsed at Ted's feet, exhausted. She was badly wounded, several stab wounds still bleeding, many scrapes and bruises. Since deserting the fat black woman who had been her handler, she had been running. The thing they called Fast Legs, no longer human, had hunted her relentlessly, along with the pyramid's monsters and the dried corpse guards. That she had lasted this long was a testament to her skill, but she was at the end of her rope. All she wanted now was to buy time to recover. If circumstances had been different, Starlight, before she'd become a powered individual, a mid-tier Hollywood actress known in the San Fernando Valley, would have indulged herself and then let him go. Now, shaken and selfish, she wanted to keep him. She put on a fragile, needy act, all the while scanning for escape. Fast Legs reappeared. Ted had already seen it, lurking in the shadows nearby, its dark skin and corrupted form making the shadows its cloak. It was barely human now. Its body secreted mucus, limbs deformed into other shapes, and a writhing lump on its back suggested a parasitic presence. "That's what's been chasing you?" Ted asked, pointing. Starlight squinted and recognized the monster. She had fought it 3 times before, each time starting strong, but never able to finish it off. It was absurdly durable and frighteningly fast. One hand had turned into a scimitar that could cleave stone. "It's it! It's it!" she rasped, crawling behind Ted and then trying to slip away. She made less than 10 meters before an invisible force froze her mid-stride, as if concrete had encased her. Starlight, who could normally lift 200 or 300 pounds easily, was trapped like an insect in amber. Only when Ted waved his hand and turned her did she see the monster clearly. Fast Legs lay in 17 or 18 pieces on the ground. Sticky and regenerative as it had been, Ted's enhanced Defindo-like power had dismembered it. Within the lump on its back squirmed a grotesque, many-legged insect. Starlight burst into tears. I'm sorry. I was terrified. It nearly killed me a few times. I couldn't help it." Ted kept his composure. "Madam, don't be afraid. I bear you no ill will. It's only human." Relief flooded Starlight's face. "You're a true gentleman. Thank you. Thank you for saving me. I can't repay you. If you want, I'll do anything." Her expression turned sultry, shy in a practiced way. She offered the beguiling look of a woman used to getting what she wanted. Before awakening, Starlight had been an actress. After gaining powers, glowing and superhuman strength, she'd risen in fame. If the Seven hadn't recruited her, she might have become a top-tier star. Ted smiled slightly. Since you offered, I won't be a gentleman. Madam, give me the golden tablet you carry. He released a telekinetic field and freed Starlight. She blinked, frostily embarrassed, then complied. It's here. She yanked open her collar with a practiced flourish, revealing deep cleavage. Then a blinding white flash filled the space, so bright it stung and heated the skin. Starlight lunged with a dagger, aiming for Ted's heart, but missed. Ted had somehow materialized beside her. Of course, there's always holy light at times like these, he murmured. Realizing she'd been bested, Starlight tried to bolt, only to be caught again in the telekinetic field, immobilized. Wait, it's a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to hurt you. Ted's attention shifted toward the entrance. With a thunderous crash, a towering figure heaved aside a boulder taller than a man and strode into view through smoke and dust. Starlight's face lit with desperate joy. Newt! Newt, save me! The newcomer was the last member of the Seven, Newt. Before awakening, he'd been a fitness-obsessed gigolo and stripper who chased muscle growth to extremes. Lacking natural talent, he binged on hormones and experimental drugs, many unsafe, until his body should have collapsed. Instead, under the strain, he awakened into a living chemical experiment. Flight, speed, and strength off the charts. Millions of injections and bad decisions had been transformed into monstrous power by Vought's intervention. He was fast, brutal, nearly immune to conventional injury. Vought's pillar, the rest of the Seven mere supporting acts. Newt flashed a wild grin at the sight of Starlight. Is this another strange ability? He's not a super, he's a wizard, Starlight cried. Wizard Schmiedard, Newt shrugged. Please release her, for your own safety. Of course, Ted replied politely, with a smile that never reached his eyes. Starlight's neck twisted in a sick, smooth motion no human could have managed. Her body dropped. A golden tablet floated free from her blouse and into Ted's hand. There, I listened. Now spare my life. The ground trembled. Sand beneath Newt burst outward as if from an explosion. Before Ted could react, Newt's fist shot through him. Ted's body dissolved into countless black shadows, which reassembled a short distance away into a new Ted. Attacking without a word, how rude, Ted said, unruffled. Newt didn't stop. He struck again and again, pulverizing Ted's shadowy fragments dozens of times in a few seconds. Ted always reformed, apparently unharmed. Fed up, Newt hurled another series of blows. This time Ted retaliated. He gathered a vast amount of magic into his fist until it blazed like a cluster of blue light and drove it into Newt's face. The impact shook the chamber, producing a concussive roar and a shockwave. Newt was blasted back through 4 or 5 boulders before coming to a halt. Ted, however, didn't fly back. From palm to elbow, his arm was shattered. Only a severed stump remained. Looks like brute force isn't enough, Newt told him, pride in his voice. Ted's arm knit back together as he spoke. Brute force is for barbarians. I am a noble magic user. He rose into the air and a brilliant white gem appeared on his brow. The spirit gem, a concentration of spirit power amassed by Ideal Land, formed from months of online users pouring spirits and attention into the system. It could serve as a temporary Ideal Land server for special operations. The space around Ted shifted, the room folded, the mirror dimension opened. Let us have a pleasant game, Ted said with relish, voice echoing strangely as the surroundings warped. It's rare to encounter such a durable target. I'll bring out all my magic and test it. Forward 5, Togami Ambition. Boom, Newt charged through the air like a bullet, passing through Ted's torso and scattering him into a sky of black dust. Ted seemed to explode into ink, only to reform a moment later, drifting like an afterimage, swaying in the wind. In the last few minutes, Newt had killed Ted hundreds of different ways, and none of it stuck. No matter how he destroyed him, Ted came back. Newt was scared. Since awakening his powers, Newt had felt like a god on Earth. He could do almost anything. Other superhumans in America were easy pickings. Strange monsters could only arm wrestle with him, and magic users' spells were mostly irritating at best, like light tickles. But this man in front of him was different. No matter what Newt threw at him, he couldn't be killed. Newt's brain, never the sharpest even after his awakening, wasn't built for this kind of analysis. He was a battering ram, strong, fast, durable, and his instinct had always been to smash. Now that smashing didn't work, his mind scrambled. A hand settled on his shoulder, and a voice said, amused, "Why aren't you moving? Move quickly. I haven't had enough fun yet." Newt reacted faster than he thought. He threw a punch that shredded Ted's upper body into black fragments, which then twisted into crows and streamed into the sky. Ted reassembled, his waist dissolving into a swirl of black smoke and flocks of crows, an abstract, living painting. "Since you're not moving, it's my turn," Ted said. He stretched out his hands. The air vibrated, and tiny black pebbles, the size of fist grenades, appeared out of nowhere, multiplying until the sky was dense with them. They fell at 200 to 300 meters per second. Newt's reflexes were so sharp that he could still see them coming, but there were too many. The stones concentrated within a few meters of him like a hailstorm. He launched himself into the air, but inside Ted's mind power range, the stones tracked him as if they had homing ability. This was an advanced summoning spell. One cast could wipe out an army. Even tanks wouldn't survive. Those high-frequency impacts would shred everything. Newt's flight and toughness let him avoid fatal damage. The stones that would have pulverized ordinary people made him grimace, but didn't stop him. His uniform hadn't even torn, impressively durable. Ted switched tactics. A fireball bloomed in his palm, expanding to 10 meters and then compacting into a glowing white sphere the size of a grapefruit. He activated mind power and restrained Newt, then hurled the sphere. Newt ripped open the mental field with sheer brute force. Air screamed as his muscles tore the psychic barrier. But it didn't matter. The white core detonated before touching him. Everything within 30 meters was incinerated. The shockwave melted the sand. Newt didn't die, but he was wrecked. All his hair was burned off. His uniform was ruined. His upper body was largely scorched away, his lower body reduced to ragged underwear-sized remnants. Large swaths of skin were charred black and brittle. Beneath, even the surface of his muscles showed raw, bright red tissue. His internal organs had been violently shaken, and his respiratory tract burned. He was in bad shape, but his body kept trying to recover. His resilience was extraordinary. He screamed, a raw cry from places he hadn't felt pain in for a year. He slammed the ground and turned Ted into another scattering of black smoke. Ted reformed not far off, the sky filled with crows, dark clouds overhead. Water release, great wall of water. On the yellow sand plain, a 10-meter tsunami rose, surging at Newt. He flew up to dodge. The sudden ocean covered the landscape. It could have caused a flood. A waterspout birthed a dragon of water 2 meters thick and dozens of meters long, which lunged at him and shattered under his punch. Even before that fall ended, 7 or 8 more water dragons formed. Ted waved, and the water froze into ice spears, over a meter long, shooting in from every angle. Newt spun like a top, his limbs smashing incoming ice spears and water dragons. The saturated attack struck dozens of times each second. His instincts kept him moving while his mind almost shorted out. Some attacks grazed him. Spears that would go through brick couldn't pierce him. They shattered on his body. But the endless stream, breaking into countless shards, dropped the temperature to well below zero within seconds. Frost gathered on him. His charred, brittle skin began to flake away in strips, exposing raw muscle beneath. Ted didn't stop. After fire and ice came electricity. A purple bolt as thick as a thigh struck him full, and Newt had no chance to dodge. He convulsed on the ground as smoke curled from him and branching lightning patterns crawled across his skin. Then Ted unleashed an enhanced sectum sempra, a nearly invisible blade that sheared a 20-meter-long trench into the earth, splitting even grains of sand neatly in two. Newt took a massive wound from his left jaw down to his right abdomen. Bone was visible, blood gushing. His muscles spasmed, instinctively contracting to slow the bleeding. "Holy cow, this can't even kill you. You're really tough," Ted muttered, impressed. He decided to escalate. Gravity magic slammed a giant rock down. Newt braced with both hands, but Ted multiplied the weight 20-fold, pressing him into the ground and burying him up to his waist. Seeing him spitting blood through his nose and mouth, Ted couldn't help but feel a bit tender. What a prize. Usually enemies died in 2 or 3 hits. This was exciting. He forced himself to avoid simple physical killing blows so he could experiment with his mind powers. Ted opened the mental onslaught. Mind pain. Red. Newt's scream cut through the air. higher and more frantic than before, as if he'd been wrung dry of every endurance he'd saved up for years. Ted watched him kneel, trembling, on the sand and felt a small softening. He let him catch a breath, then cast false balance, blue. Instantly, Newt's physique jumped by 36 points. He felt omnipotent, immortal. Ted tried to estimate. Conservatively, his physique must be 70 or 80 now, maybe over 100. Ted couldn't read his strength, constitution, and agility. His stats were too mismatched. Only that intelligence, perception, and spirit were 416-8. Oh, and he was level 17. No wonder he was so durable. Ted grinned. Time to call in the army. He dumped a horde of summons into the air. Armored trolls, granite golems, jackalweir troops led by Hog, raptor squads riding jumpers, airborne bonefish with exposed skeletons still floating, veiled ghost nuns standing 2.5 meters tall, the skeleton army's bone brotherhood, accompanied by a blasting death rock band. Also, fishman hunters, goblin scraps, kobold miners, orc cannon fodder, meat zombies, fallen rogues, raptors, poisonous snakes. 2 years of gathering leftover summoning cards had built a mountain of fodder. Ted sent them all on the assault. The cannon fodder pack charged obediently. Newt slammed the ground with a bang, sending vibrations that toppled a third of them. Many skeletons fell apart. Then the music started, an ear-splitting death metal roar that scraped at the brain like metal on glass. Newt's hearing, already hyperhuman, became a liability. The sound felt like a tightening spell on his vital points, making him want to roll on the ground. Meanwhile, the summoned creatures grew stronger as he weakened. The jackalweirs and radraptor squadrons swelled with fury. Hog roared, and the double buffs turned the horde feral and bloodthirsty. Half crippled, Newt staggered through an endless barrage. The monsters seemed inexhaustible, sticky, tenacious, disgusting. While he fought desperately, Ted slipped to the core of the upper pyramid, where Starlight and the others had found the golden tablet and began deciphering it. With comprehend languages and decipher spells, he had already grasped the basics. The tablet recorded a method for a mortal to become a god from another world, ancient Egyptian ritual. The requirements were brutal: a divine blood pharaoh, a mighty empire, a grand pyramid, and the accumulation of massive wish power and magic power to fuel the ceremony. The original pharaoh had failed to complete it, likely because there wasn't enough magic gathered. Ted realized the pyramid itself had been a setup, a scheme to resurrect the pharaoh and gather power via mummy resurrection and sacrificial components. Basically, the pyramid was a ceremonial engine to deify the pharaoh. He reached the chamber where the pharaoh's sarcophagus had lain. The central platform was a mound of yellow sand. The coffin had sunk into the depths. Ted didn't fuss over booby traps. He used mind power to whip a whirlwind over the sand and pull it up, sending the yellow grains into mirror space. He wanted to know how much it could store. The sand poured into the void until the golden, Egyptian-style coffin, carved with human figures, emerged. A heavy, hoarse sigh came from inside. The lid cracked open, and black smoke poured forth toward Ted, then vanished. The coffin was empty. Extreme Maze spell read, activated. "I don't have time to deal with you now. Stay there," Ted said, locking the pharaoh away. He turned back to Newt, who was already a tangle of real and unreal threats in the mirror space. This experimental subject was too valuable to kill. In the mirror space, Newt was losing his mind entirely, staggering, bleeding, fighting phantoms and real summons. Ted watched him fight things that were partly game monsters, partly real summons, partly phantoms, and partly figments of his own mind. It was no longer a mirror space. It was a mind illusion under Ted's whim, truth and falsehood braided together. No matter how tough a brute is, a magic user can make him a toy or turn him to ash. Then, suddenly, Newt looked up. His eyes flashed red, and a scorching laser lanced straight through Ted's chest. Ted toppled, surprise on his face. "Ha ha! Ha ha! I hit him! I've been waiting for this! You're going to die!" Newt crowed, delirious with triumph. But the fallen Ted simply dissolved into shadow and reformed. He was able to appear before Newt in his true form. This brute's supposed trump card had failed. Newt's mental defenses collapsed. "No, impossible! That was my trump card. How could you dodge it?" he cried. Ted smiled coldly. He had kept cards hidden from the Vought group, a secret measure. He could afford to. Now that Newt's last hope had failed, he was a broken shell. Ted cast Life Parasite, red. Select a target. Parasitize a portion of their magic power and slowly siphon their life to strengthen yourself. Uses 1/1. He'd had that card for years and never found the right subject. This brute was perfect. I want to see how much this can strengthen me, Ted thought. Deep in the underground pyramid, Grindelwald's blue flames had swallowed the yellow sand. The Egyptian high priest resurrected earlier turned to ash in the modified fiend fire. This time he was truly dead. Grindelwald looked at the young couple huddled in a corner amid sand and ash. Don't be a traitor to the wizards anymore. Be a good wizard, he said. Yes, yes, we'll listen, Slotta replied, nodding like a sparrow. The Egyptian woman kept apologizing. We were forced. We wanted to live, not to be traitors. Grindelwald nodded and reached out. The obsidian tablet in the woman's arms flew to his hand. She hesitated but seated it. A life was worth more than a relic. Sir, I can read the script. I can help you interpret it, she stammered. No need, Grindelwald replied coolly. I can read it. Slotta glanced down and saw something glitter at his feet, a golden wrist guard inlaid with gems. He picked it up and handed it to Grindelwald. The bracelet was scorpion-shaped with ruby inlays and hummed with subtle magic. You did well, Grindelwald said. The cleanup was handled by Grindelwald's subordinates. They cleared hidden forces near Cairo, eliminated local opposing wizards, and removed surrounding threats. The operation was a success. Grindelwald had gained a powerful bracelet and an obsidian tablet of resurrection magic. Ted had captured 2 living subjects, the pharaoh mummy and Newt, as well as the golden tablet describing the deification ritual. He'd also rescued Fleur and the others. I can't repay you, Fleur said breathlessly. Come to my room and I'll tell you personally. Let me go. Let me go. I have class tomorrow, Ted protested. Meanwhile, in a sci-fi underground base deep under Nevada, someone watched the feed. The signal had cut off when Newt entered the pyramid. The only certainty was that he wasn't dead. The superpower-linked candle was still burning here. It didn't look like Newt had escaped his control. Newt was strong, but not cunning. Could he have been captured alive? Fortunately, there was a backup. In a large glass jar, a baby floated in nutrient fluid. Newt's superclone, genetically modified with additional powers, and raised in an amniotic medium laced with compound V. He had been grown to be a superweapon even stronger than Newt. Ted didn't care what was happening in the United States. He'd already pulled a few scraps of information about the Vought group from the minds of Newt and Starlight, but those two had been nothing more than the company's muscle, security, and performers. What core secrets could they possibly hold? Even Newt, the team's core, only knew the face of the CEO. He had no idea about internal plans and didn't care. With his head full of his own affairs, Ted couldn't blame him. So Ted remained vague about the Vought group. Even if it had grand designs, what did that have to do with him? It was across the Atlantic. He only kept their name because of a passing curiosity about a mysterious drug that could amplify powers. Ted felt the same about Grindelwald. The Dark Wizard had resurfaced and seemed to have regained his former strength, and the Saint organization was prospering in Africa. Fine, let Dumbledore and his circle worry about that. Ted wasn't fishing for the previous generation's grudges. Unless someone was leaving a fortune, count him out. He soothed Fleur, bought some local specialties and souvenirs, and returned to Hogwarts. When he'd said earlier that he had class tomorrow, he hadn't been joking. He'd skipped the afternoon's lessons. After a shower and a change of clothes, he headed to the Great Hall for dinner. Hermione was already there, meticulously cutting a pork chop with a dinner knife, almost painfully careful. Ted sat and breathed out. Hermione, did your afternoon go okay? You're back? She said, glancing up as she picked up a sausage and continued to slice. She speared a bit and offered it to him. Ted opened his mouth. If he didn't confess now, who knew what she'd cut next? I went to Egypt at noon. Professor Geller needed me. Mentioning Professor Geller made Hermione alert. She knew his true identity. Why did he need you? Didn't Dumbledore tell you to minimize contact? Minimize doesn't mean avoid completely, Ted said. Besides, Fleur was in danger. Geller told me, so I went to help. Hermione didn't say more. She kept slicing. Lying or hiding things wasn't wise. Better to be frank. Language is an art, though, and how you tell the truth matters. Ted described the pyramid, the resurrected mummies, the golden and black tablets, and the goblin archaeology team that had been plundering everything only to be wiped out. He lingered over the 7 from the United States. Those guys' abilities are strange, like magic triggered something different inside them, not exactly a wizard's path. That newt was something else. He could fly 100 meters in an instant. No one could react. His strength was incredible. His skin felt like copper and his bones like iron. Honestly, even Snape might not stand a chance if it were a surprise. If it were a surprise, Snape might indeed be at a disadvantage. Newt's raw power was fearsome. Many wizards wouldn't have time to raise a wand, but if Snape had preparation, he wouldn't be helpless. Spellcasters always had counters. Snape, good at poisons and subtlety, would find a way. Ted exaggerated a little. He'd been carried away painting Newt as invincible. A dry cough came from the staff table. Snape, sitting not far away, fixed Ted with a cold stare. Ted smiled sheepishly. Don't slander a professor to avoid attention, he thought. Because of Ted's story and Snape's reaction, Hermione's doubts eased. Ted produced the gifts from Egypt and passed them around. Harry popped on a pharaoh mask and shook his head, grinning. Neville took a small brass pyramid and turned it over in his hands. The vendor had called it a millennium puzzle. Solve it, he'd promised, and you'd learn great secrets. Jerry fussed with an ornate hourglass. Like the sands of time, he said. Ron had found a gem-carved beetle and refused to give it up. I'm keeping this. No one fights me for it, Ron crowed, kissed it fiercely, put it on a thin chain, and hung it around his neck. What is this beetle, Ted? It's brilliant. It's a scarab. Scarab. Nice. Sounds impressive. Ron was pleased, until Hermione, ever the pedant, said, it's basically a dung beetle, the kind that rolls balls of dung. Ron's smile froze. He looked from the scarab on his chest to the half-eaten drumstick in his hand. It suddenly didn't taste so good. That evening, Hermione made a point of checking things. Her assessment, the amount of magic involved hadn't decreased. Ted hadn't lied. Her deduction was Sherlock level, even beating Conan's. Meanwhile, Dolores Umbridge had become unusually active, especially in meddling with school affairs. She'd been appointed senior undersecretary to the Ministry of Magic, stationed at Hogwarts while Dumbledore was absent, and she loved throwing her weight around. She interfered with other professors' classes, issued petty decrees from the ministry, and tried to manage everything. She had a mean streak, but was only average in intelligence. She often made a mess of things. After 2 months of scheming, she'd only managed to recruit Filch. For some reason, perhaps the allure of restoring Hogwarts to the strict order of past decades, Filch had aligned himself with her. Umbridge privately despised him. He reminded her of her squib brother, but she had no other allies. Her meddling infuriated most of the students. She insisted the house elves cook with conjured flames because burning wood and straw produced smoke and polluted the environment. That kind of high-precision heat control was not cooking, it was advanced magic training. She announced pre-made dishes and suggested delicacies like roasted duck necks. The students seethed, but only a few in Gryffindor acted. The Weasley twins and their friend Lee Jordan chose a more indirect route. They encouraged Peeves. Peeves took to harassing Umbridge constantly. She walked around the castle with protective amulets and no longer slept at the school for fear of nightly torment. The Weasley twins had truly gone all out. Overnight, they sprayed an entire corridor with powerful adhesion swamp disguise spray. Floors and walls became a muddy, stinking swamp. Moss, mushrooms, and ferns sprouted and clung to the ceiling like a South American jungle. Filch worked half a day trying to clean it up, but the corridor was enchanted to self-restore. Even the strongest cleaning charms on the market failed and only caused the fungi to mutate. Filch went to McGonagall for help. He'd hoped Umbridge could do something, but she'd left work early because Peeves had doused her face and hair with permanent 7-color ink. That ink was diabolical. It adhered permanently, and when light hit it, shimmered in a rainbow of nightclub colors. Umbridge didn't set foot in the school for 3 days. When she returned, she wore an amulet that repelled liquids. The war of pranks had escalated into a full magical offense and defense game. Umbridge looked ridiculous, but the rest of the school delighted in her humiliation. Then something inside Ted's head pinged, talent, otherworld knowledge, gold, triggered. Discovered, night at the museum, Pharaoh gold plate, purple. The discovery was a golden plate from ancient Egypt, classified as purple epic. According to the knowledge it contained, the plate recorded an archaic, mysterious magic capable, under certain conditions, of giving life to inanimate objects, animating displays, statues, and exhibits. There were many restrictions, and it was temporary, but the ability to bestow a simulated soul made the plate extremely valuable. It required 2,150 experience points to unlock. Ted exchanged the points. A sequence of images flooded his mind, like watching a film. He recognized it, the movie Night at the Museum. In the film, the Egyptian gold plate brought museum exhibits to life at night. The knowledge in his head said the plate didn't strictly have to activate only at night. In its default mode, it would only enable the simplest, least consuming animation. With additional resources and configuration, the parameters could be changed. Essentially, this magic resembled object animation or construct animation from the Dungeons & Dragons worlds, only in a mass, area of effect version. It could animate many objects at once, turning them into golem-like soldiers. With the right add-ons, it might even grant sentience. That was far more powerful than any conventional AI. Ted's mind raced, puppets, golems, mechs, all in swarms. The plate's biggest advantage was its area effect. Animate a large number of items simultaneously, though not permanently. It was the fantasy equivalent of scattering beans to produce an army. In February, the school felt livelier. Last year's Triwizard Tournament had brought attention back to the magical world, and many organizations were organizing events again. Hermione entered the International Wizarding Academy Potion Championship, an event hosted by the International Potions Guild and featuring 5 schools from Europe and Africa. MagicNet Utopia live-streamed the whole competition, which served as publicity for the platform. After 3 days, Hermione placed second out of 50 contestants, taking the Silver Cauldron Award. Several young wizards from other countries made clumsy attempts to court her during the event. Hermione, already striking and with a serious academic air, had become quite the attraction. Crumb watched on the network and silently voted for his heroine. Ted grinned to himself. I underestimated Hermione before. Those robes hit a lot. New clothes make a difference. At least half the credit goes to me, he thought. A few days later, 2 more international events were live-streamed, the International Wizard Chess Championship and the Spanish Wizard Dueling Championship. The Dueling Championship smashed previous records, peaking at 260,000 concurrent viewers, probably a quarter of the wizarding world online. Advertisers flocked, and prize money swelled. The dueling prize reached 10,000 galleons. Ted considered entering just to cash in, but decided it would be vulgar to personally snatch the money. He'd rather keep his dignity as a capitalist. Just as Ted settled into this rare stretch of leisure, Dumbledore and Voldemort clashed. It wasn't the usual skirmish between the Order of the Phoenix and Death Eater forces. This was fiercer. 6 wizards died outright between both sides, and countless cannon fodder from other worlds fell. Goblins, kobolds, murlocs. Death Eaters had a habit of throwing hired monsters like meat shields. Demand for hill giants, ogres, and trolls had even spiked on the black market. For the first time in years, Dumbledore and Lord Voldemort met in direct combat. Historically, Dumbledore had avoided a head-on duel with Voldemort. He hadn't wanted to risk everything and fail. But this time he went on the offensive and, to a surprising degree, got the better of Voldemort. Of course, for those not directly involved, the fallout was quiet. No headlines were printed, and most people remained unaware. But on the battlefield, the struggle was brutal. Afterward, Voldemort wrestled with his options. Should he give up on this particular campaign? He felt the pressure like a taxman counting the pennies at month's end. The war and ambitions tormented him. Ted, for his part, sighed and returned to his own small battles, code, live streams, and the odd magical discovery. When will these days end? He wondered. He didn't know. For now, life at Hogwarts hummed on. Pranks, competitions, political squabbles, purple epic artifacts, and a world that kept getting stranger. 407. Great changes unseen in a century. Lord Voldemort, a level 20 dark wizard, had been one of the world's powerhouses. He would sacrifice anything for power, even his own handsome face, and was ruthless enough to tear his soul into pieces. In the years before his rise, the celestial convergence had already begun to leave its mark, but for the magic world, it mostly meant the sudden appearance of new magical species, materials, and plants. Voldemort was not greatly affected then and followed the traditional path of a dark wizard, the Horcrux route. That path had one overwhelming advantage: extreme resilience. As long as one Horcrux remained, he would not truly die. With his abilities, clinging to life meant resurrection was only a matter of time. At that stage, the magic world was still comparatively simple, but when Voldemort was struck by his own killing curse, the second major celestial convergence happened. Many intelligent magical races from other worlds began to appear. The shock to this world was enormous. The magic world managed to keep most of these visitors hidden from Muggles, but the newcomers worked hard to integrate. The knowledge they brought, especially their magic, dramatically changed the direction of magical development here. By the time Ted and his friends began school, a decade had passed since that influence appeared, and its effects were already being felt. Take Great Britain as an example. Dwarven rune magic greatly expanded the domain covered by runic studies and raised the discipline's importance. If runes had once occupied a fifth of magical study, they now took up a third. Rune magic could do far more than before. Masters of runes scrambled to learn the new knowledge. 7 or 8 new rune textbooks appeared every year. Then there were the gnomes' magic devices, tools that extended magic with a scientific approach, blending mechanics with a primitive form of electronics. Wizards, whose magic and magical tools had long been based on intuition and feeling, were stunned by the precision and accuracy of these devices. Even more astonishing, magic devices could integrate with rune magic and circle theory, acting as a highly compatible framework that elevated device engineering by 2 or 3 levels. Giant city-scale machines in Ironhammer Fortress could harness virtually infinite geothermal energy to control and protect the entire city. Gnome Grand Artificers and Dwarf Grand Masters could conduct large-scale experiments and creations in their workshops. It felt like science fiction. The elven knowledge was even more intoxicating. Their magic was deeper and more powerful, especially the Mage's Ward. It was a system for creating large magical chains that could protect cities, the magic world's equivalent of chip technology, precise to within 10 nanometers. For wizards still tinkering with metaphorical integrated circuits, the elves' systems were a devastatingly advanced leap. Fortunately, elves were rare, fewer than 200 in all of Great Britain, so their presence didn't overwhelm society overnight. But the cumulative effect of all this new magic drove many wizards onto entirely different paths. Ordinary wizards were less affected because only the most exceptional were exploring otherworld systems. Most treated magic as an inherited tool, like people in a high-tech society treat their everyday devices. The magic world remained an elite-led society. That's why when Ted proposed innovations like the ideal land, the elite accepted them so readily. Powerful wizards were already experimenting with all sorts of new approaches. For Lord Voldemort, this upheaval was not good news. Before his first death, none of these breakthroughs existed. When he came back to civilization from the forest, brought back by Professor Quirrell, he was single-mindedly focused on the Philosopher's Stone and on resurrecting himself. He hadn't paid attention to the elite circles of the magic world. By the time he was truly free and active again, the world had moved on. Ryan, a visitor from another world, was preparing to raise 1,000,000 skeletons in Paris. It was Ryan's death magic that first worried Voldemort. Ryan's finger of death was far more potent than the killing curse, and Voldemort feared it. He managed to kill Ryan secretly, but the encounter left him hungry for otherworld magic knowledge. Opportunities were scarce, however, and his identity limited his time. Then, a few months ago, he finally caught someone, an otherworldly visitor. Green skin, tusks, big and clumsy, ugly in appearance but wearing a mage's robe embroidered with magical materials and circles, an orc warlock from Draenor. When the orcs opened the dark portal and invaded Azeroth, the unstable Draenor was shredded and fragments of it swept this orc into our world. He landed injured in Sweden. A careless Death Eater encountered him and fell to a fear plus drain life combination. The orc healed somewhat after killing that wizard, but other Death Eaters pursued him. In the skirmish, the orc killed 2 more, one struck by a shadow bolt that drained every hint of color from his skin, the other tortured to death by corruption and agony, howling for an age. The slaughter attracted Voldemort's attention. Voldemort seized the orc warlock, probed its memories, and found pages of warlock spellcraft. He devoured the knowledge. In 3 months, he had mastered agony and destruction spells. His level did not change, and he still hadn't broken the world's ceiling, but his destructive power increased dramatically. Brimming with arrogance, he challenged Dumbledore, the old immortal. Dumbledore, level 21, was the only being to have broken the limit in this world. He had traveled his own path for over 100 years and achieved unprecedented accomplishments on that path. His magic, transfiguration, and spellcraft were all level 10, dark arts level 9, and his resistances, penetration, and alchemy were world-class. He wasn't as unconventional as Voldemort, but in raw strength and potential, he was far ahead. "I hear you've been looking for me," Dumbledore said. "Do you have the strength to fight me? I'll give you a chance, but you are useless." The duel lasted less than half an hour. Voldemort fled badly injured. Fortunately for him, Dumbledore held back from some of his most troublesome tactics, so Voldemort escaped without being ruined. Still, the clash overturned the balance between their factions. On the front lines, Death Eaters began to rout, retreating eastward into Europe. While the magic world fought its titanic battles, Ted and his team were busy as well. Early February brought new restlessness. Ted missed the finals of the Spanish Wizard Dueling Championship. Something urgent had come up in Britain. Rumors of a haunting at Edinburgh Castle had spread. Lupin took people to investigate and found something foul. Ted had wanted to see it for himself, but London requested his aid directly. His reputation from Paris had grown him favor with high-ranking Muggle officials, and Lupin vouched for him. The British Queen personally requested Ted's help. Fudge was furious, feeling this young upstart was bypassing him and colluding with the Muggle Queen, but Ted had no time for political resentments. He went straight to London. North of London lies Highgate Cemetery, one of Britain's largest. 37 acres, over 52,000 headstones, 167,000 buried, Victorian luminaries like Karl Marx among them. 2 nights earlier, the old night watchman had felt something was wrong. On his patrol at dawn, he realized it took nearly an hour to cover a route that normally took half that time. Closer inspection revealed why. Many new graves had appeared overnight. The man convinced himself he was imagining it, and afraid to report the oddity, he continued his rounds, only to die the following night. By the time the authorities realized the problem, the cemetery lay under a faint mist. Creatures lurked in that fog. 6 police officers went in and never returned. Lupin was occupied in Scotland, so they asked Ted to take a team and investigate. Ted confirmed the magic signature. The cemetery's area had more than doubled. Inside were broken headstones, overturned graves, rotten earth, and hordes of wandering zombies. A system prompt informed him the place was the Great Cemetery from Diablo 2. The evil cave had appeared earlier. Now the Great Cemetery had followed. Had Britain become closer to the Diablo world? A blood-red javelin sliced through the mist. Ted caught it one-handed. Since using the card, Life Parasitism, to absorb Newt and strengthen himself, his physical attributes had become ridiculously enhanced. The attacker was Bloodraven, the fallen rogue, an entirely red figure, both undead and demon in nature. She was strong, but even she was no match for Newt's power, which Ted now shared. While Ted handled Highgate, France was in turmoil as well. Fleur led teams to track a group of mysterious assassins who had been killing several famous entrepreneurs. At first, the wizards assumed a Muggle matter and let the Muggles handle it. But when the assassins kept striking and displayed strange, supernatural combat prowess, the Ministry changed its tune. Fleur took charge to make contact and test them. Before she could make progress, a separate incident gripped the nation. A police officer killed in an explosion had been rebuilt as a half-human, half-machine cyborg by a scientist, a transformation that ignited ethical debates nationwide. Germany's wizards were fighting too. Their foes, a contingent of Nazi zombies from World War II, somehow reconstituted and apparently intent on world domination. In the mountains, someone discovered a strange underground entrance that opened onto a riveted metal city, only to be killed inside by automatic sentries. Before he died, he heard the metallic voice. Warning, intruder detected. Nomerigan Guardian Robot Model 2.35 TM446, initiating clearance. Whether his family could ever find that subterranean city was unknown. Greece reported giant, resilient beasts appearing in the wild. Lions that weapons could not pierce, boars with infinite strength, and huge eagles that specialized in tearing out human organs. In Spain, the dueling championship had to pause when distant spectators began dying under mysterious and brutally violent circumstances. No bodies were found, only a scene splattered with blood and a strange metallic Rubik's Cube, its surfaces carved with intricate mechanisms and patterns. In Africa, Grindelwald, backed by the Black Monkey principle, had effectively taken Ouagadougou under his control and was subduing much of the continent's magical leadership. His expansion was smooth. Tribal wizards began reporting prophetic dreams of a true king rising on the savannah. The Lion King will reclaim his throne. Southeast Asia was stranger still. Folk beliefs and minor deities proliferated, but the most alarming phenomenon was the resurgence of dinosaurs. Even with military clearances, many dinosaurs still ranged to forest edges and into towns. Every month, dozens to hundreds died from dinosaur attacks in villages, towns, and even cities. The losses in wild regions were incalculable. More fantastical still, a powerful gang emerged in that region. Its members had enormous strength and ruthless combat power. They annexed other gangs and even small warlords' territories, recruiting locals en masse. They wielded a technology that extracted dinosaur genes to enhance human bodies. Interpol's last informant report described the organization's mastermind as a short, shifty-looking man in a white lab coat, more researcher than gangster. The world had changed. New magics, new machines, and new monsters were remapping every boundary the wizards had once known. The celestial convergence had opened doors no one could close, and the century's great transformations were only beginning. My group kept pulling me into chats. I was duped by some ridiculously stupid fake news, and it made me furious. I can't do this. I can't write today. It's all their fault. 409. The Lord of the Rings, my Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings, my Lord of the Rings. Umbridge hadn't been seen at Hogwarts in some time. The last incident had been 3 weeks earlier, when Hermione and 2 other students signed up for the International School Potion Championship. Umbridge had blocked them, insisting that the ministry and the school must decide the participants. First, give me your pledge of allegiance. Only our own people can compete in such international contests, she sneered. I've finally found your weakness. She'd been careless, either complacent or out of touch with the post-magic era, so Ted had recorded the whole thing. The clip went up online and became a Daily Prophet headline. Shocking. Hogwarts may be barred from the International Potion Championship. Ministry Senior Advisor forbids student participation. The backlash was immediate and brutal. There were 12 howlers from inside Britain alone and 4 more from overseas, almost roasting her alive. 16 howlers in total rained down on her that day, each one nastier than the last. Many of the letters were vulgar enough to make grown wizards wince, and the students at Hogwarts delighted in the spectacle, though it was hardly a model of decorum for the younger ones. The most damning blow, however, came from Fudge himself. The International Potions Association had written to him to condemn such malicious interference. Their condemnation sent herb prices in Diagon Alley into a frenzy. The association controlled some 70% of the herb and potion trade. Cornered and furious, Umbridge took 3 days off to slink back to the ministry and placate Fudge. I'm very angry now, Fudge had written in typical fashion. 3 weeks later, emboldened, Umbridge returned. She gleefully hung Educational Decree No. 78 on the bulletin board, despite the board already being full, ordering Filch to post it. That's when the Weasley twins intervened. They'd been working on product development instead of job hunting. They were going into business, not employment. That morning, they'd handed a prototype to their product experience officer, Peeves, and now it was time to test it. The super-concentrated everlasting dung bomb, a hyper-evolved version of the dung bomb. Peeves launched a 10-shot volley without ceremony. Filch and Umbridge, perched on a ladder posting the decree, were hit squarely. There was a series of dull thuds, something heavy and wet fell onto their heads, and a thick, yellow-brown smoke spread out at once. Umbridge reached up. It was sticky and yellow. She opened her mouth to scream and immediately gagged. Tears and snot streamed down her face, and she staggered. Filch fared worse. He fell from the ladder with a cry, inhaled the stench, and passed out. The worst part wasn't the texture, but the smell, an everlasting horse manure stench. The twins had conducted more than a dozen trials and finally blocked the effects of 6 common magical cleaning agents. This smell lasted anywhere from 10 days to a month. It couldn't be washed off. It was like sleeping in a pile of manure. Professor McGonagall was forced, politely and with a handkerchief to her nose, to invite the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor to eat separately in her office. The professors could manage the stench. The students could not, and hungry, queasy children were not acceptable. Umbridge was livid and humiliated. "If I don't avenge this, I swear I'm not human," she ranted. She could not retreat. If she backed down, Fudge would abandon her, and the few hundred students who'd been insulting her behind her back would finish her off in the ministry's social circles. Her thoughts grew darker and more extreme by the day. March was almost here. Ding talent, otherworld knowledge triggered, discovered, Celebrimbor ring forging method, purple. Celebrimbor. Under the shadow of the wars in Middle-earth, among countless heroes and villains, there was the One Ring, and Celebrimbor, the elven smith who forged the rings of power and learned ring-crafting secrets from Sauron. The discovery required roughly 3,000 experience points to unlock. Ted recognized the name immediately, the elven craftsman who forged the rings of power. There'd been rumors that, when some fragments of Middle-earth had bled into this world, a stone tablet recording the method of forging the One Ring had traveled with them. The method had already been shared online, sparking a wave of spirit sharing. Wizards posting their attempts to forge magic rings, goblins and dwarves showing their processes. The results were often hilarious. Someone even made a ring that shrank a very unfortunate part of the anatomy, which the internet mockingly called the shrinking ring. Ted himself had forged a few rings. Fleur wore one that amplified her charm and had surprised many, but none of those items came close to the potency the One Ring represented. What the elves had preserved was likely a watered-down, incomplete technique. Still, the discovery was purple-tier knowledge. Ted spent the experience points. Immediately his senses shifted. He was no longer in his body, but a pale spirit watching as Celebrimbor, tall and handsome with pointed ears, raised a magic hammer and struck an anvil. Rings of various shapes came into being under his hands, gem set, inscribed, flawless. Ted followed the whole sequence. Another man took the first 16 rings, but Celebrimbor, not yet satisfied, secretly forged 3 more rings using the method Sauron had taught him. Sauron was unaware. Those 3 became the 3 elven rings, untainted by the One Ring's domination. Then everything darkened. Sauron learned of Celebrimbor's secret and kidnapped his family, forcing Celebrimbor to help forge a final ring. When the One Ring was finished, Celebrimbor put it on and escaped, raised an army, and attacked Mordor. For a time, wearing the ring made Celebrimbor incredibly powerful. He almost overpowered Sauron. But at the crucial moment, the ring slipped from his finger and flew into Sauron's hand. It betrayed him. The ring, infused with Sauron's power, was literally a part of the Dark Lord. Celebrimbor was killed. Ted watched time leap forward. A raid on the Black Gate, a ranger and his family taken and sacrificed in a ritual to recall Celebrimbor's soul. The dying ranger became possessed by Celebrimbor's spirit. It was Celebrimbor's presence that clung to the last flicker of life in that body. The newly possessed ranger bent orcs to his will, an ability born of having once worn the ring, and trained them, building an army for revenge. They planned again to forge a ring at Mount Doom, and Ted watched that forging sequence unfold twice, Celebrimbor pouring his power into a new ring, and then his soul being taken by black smoke. Ted ascended back to himself, astonished by the wealth of knowledge he'd just absorbed. He'd seen the One Ring's forging not once but twice, and had observed many of Sauron's tactics. It was enlightening, if bittersweet. Ultimately, of course, it failed. Sauron was later defeated when the Fellowship destroyed the ring in Mount Doom. The ancient ring was, in effect, a Horcrux of Sauron himself. Only the place of its forging could undo it. Ted grinned. No wonder this know-how was purple tier. If it included the One Ring's forging method, it was a major find. He thought about forging his own ring immediately, but good things come with steep requirements. The Middle-earth method demanded a place like Mount Doom, an area of intense, concentrated magic, and a massive infusion of power, an amount of experience unlikely to be trivial. He estimated level 20 as the minimum, perhaps requiring pouring in vast experience points equivalent to dropping 20 levels in one go. But he also knew this world didn't have to copy Middle-earth blindly. There were the Magic Net and Ideal Land. The Magic Net's convergence points could serve as the equivalent of Mount Doom if he found one strong enough. For the torrent of experience, he could harvest power of spirit through Ideal Land and contributions from wizards worldwide. The ring's materials would be the easiest part. It wouldn't be a month's work, even if he started now, but it was doable with a plan. That meant more players, more spirit, more experience poured into the system. Ted started hatching ideas to incentive players. He'd increase online time with flashy events, Stranglethorn fishing extravaganza, Gurubashi arena chest battle, stimulating battlefield, winner-winner chicken dinner. Valentine's Day had passed, but he'd craft his own holiday, March 3rd, Monster Slaying Day, and roll out 30 holiday events and daily quests with generous rewards. The more players he mobilized, the faster he could gather power of spirit. While Ted plotted, the world's tempo kept accelerating. Parker forwarded a post from the Ideal Land Forum. A savage ancient city appeared in Sweden, containing many otherworld monsters. Sweden had already had an Orc Mountain incident. This new appearance, what looked like a decrepit city reeking of savagery, was even worse. The place was stained and bloody. Thousands of orcs of many kinds swarmed it. There were small, fast orcs skilled with javelins, throwing knives and bows, and there were giants over 3 meters tall, wielding stone hammers the size of barrels. The settlement showed clear divisions of labor and hierarchy, an early stage of civilization, not mere random beasts. The local wizards were on edge. They'd been complacent once before, and a Muggle town had nearly been wiped out before anyone realized what was happening. It had taken the Muggle army, using light and heavy firepower, 3 or 4 days of brutal fighting to clear the last of those orcs. This time the wizards were quicker. Within 2 hours of the city appearing, a wizard had reported it, and 4 hours later, the Swedish Ministry of Magic knew. But the scale was terrifying. Remote reconnaissance estimated at least 4,000 orcs in the city, each individually dangerous. The Swedish response encountered unexpected sophistication. One wizard was maimed, and 4 Muggle special forces were killed by a tall, thin orc using explosive javelins. The orcs even employed rudimentary gunpowder weapons and homemade flamethrowers. While Muggle officials and Swedish wizards were still arguing about coordination, a band of orc assassins struck the temporary frontline command post. They killed 3 wizards, 2 of them senior ministry officials, and 16 Muggles, among them 1 Ministry of Defense Major General and 3 Special Forces colonels. 2 high-ranking government officials were also slain. The orcs beheaded some victims and took the heads with them. The command camp exploded into chaos. The world was changing faster than anyone had expected. 410 canned orc Pokemon. After poring over the reports from Sweden, Ted began to suspect that his monthly Otherworld knowledge updates followed an internal logic. Why had he been given instructions for forging rings of power at the same time a Middle-earth orc city had appeared there? Was it coincidence, or was something linking those drops? Looking at the online photos, the smeared, half-dreamed images of the orc city, the tattered human-forward command post after the raid, an urge rose in him. He had to go see it. Not merely for the spectacle. This was a rare, large-scale appearance of an intelligent otherworld race, and they'd arrived hostile. It was worth investigating. In Ironhammer Fortress, for instance, the dwarves and gnomes combined couldn't muster 1,000 people after more than 10 years. Here, 4,000 or 5,000 orcs had shown up at once. According to the original Netizen photos, these orcs already had distinct occupations and even some crude technology and magic. Ted stared at the last shot from the overrun outpost. Blood everywhere, pooling on the ground. The headless corpses the post had mentioned were gone, likely dragged off. Bullet holes pocked the temporary board walls. The defenders had fought back. There were also traces of spellwork, marks like stupefy on the walls. Wizards in this world had lived in peace so long they were slack, Ted thought. Stupefy in this situation? You should be using Killing Curse. If it connects, you might at least even the score. He could picture it. A 2-meter-tall, burly orc struck by stupefy, bruised and stumbling, then shrugging it off and charging again. The orc's raid had been swift. On-site resistance had been feeble. Ted also saw other magic traces, widespread corrosive burn patterns. The green-painted field tables pitted and eaten away. These orcs had harnessed some form of magic. That made sense. Sauron and his minions wielded dark sorcery. Some under him would too. Ted's pulse quickened. He was a mind mage. He could reproduce Celebrimbor's methods, use spirit oppression and control to dominate these orcs. Caught red-handed spilling human blood, they deserved no mercy. Sweden might be officially neutral, but it could fight. What was a town-city of several thousand orcs? Could they carpet bomb it? His real objective was to gather biological samples, blood, genes. He could reproduce the city and its inhabitants in ideal land, copy them into mirror space for research and gaming data. If they died, he could harvest souls, alchemize a few orcs, slip souls into new bodies, and experiment without scruples. Space Marine dream, space orcs, potential, surely. He couldn't wait. As he expected, the Swedish authorities were furious. Sweden's wizards erupted into action. The Swedish regular forces numbered 35,100, with main equipment including over 700 tanks, 280 Leopard 2s, more than 1,200 infantry fighting vehicles, over 600 APCs, and 36 155mm Archer self-propelled howitzers. They sent out an armored brigade, an infantry brigade, and an artillery regiment, a rough quarter of the nation's combat power. But real combat hadn't happened in years. Mobilizing took time. The first wave of the infantry brigade did not reach the battlefield until the afternoon of the second day. Because the frontline post had been overrun earlier, they fell back 2 kilometers and spent the day digging trenches, laying barbed wire and mines, and setting up high-tech surveillance and hidden sentry posts. The wizard contingent was simpler. A little over 30 middle-aged and elderly casters came in. That was essentially Sweden's available combat magic force. Sweden's population was a bit over 10 million, and the number of wizards seemed only a little over 600. This time, roughly 1/200th of their population had died. The losses weighed heavily. Younger wizards were barred from the front. If 2 more fell, the country couldn't bear it. Heartbreaking. Ted arrived on the morning of day 2. Using the Flu network and an invisible aerial direct flight, he had gotten there quickly. He watched Swiss engineers nervously digging and laying mines. The soldiers, heavily armed with steel helmets and bulletproof vests, looked formidable at a glance, but their faces were terrified. First, because their enemy was unfamiliar, and second, because they hadn't fought in years. 20 tanks and IFVs sat in line behind the engineers, protecting them as they worked. Humans were anxious about the otherworld orcs. The orcs, appearing suddenly in a strange new environment outside their city, were probably uneasy too. Both sides were wary. Ted drifted toward the orc city, invisible in the air, and studied it closely. Calling it a city was generous. A 5-meter-high stone wall surrounded an interior approximately 1,500 by 1,200 meters. Inside, buildings were sparse and haphazard. The tallest structure was a 20-meter watchtower of rough logs and stones, logs over half a meter in diameter. As Ted prepared to approach, he noticed a large vulture-like raptor patrolling nearby, intensely vigilant. Someone had put it up for aerial reconnaissance. Ted felt a different spirit signature in that ugly bird. Someone was mentally linked to it, controlling it. It felt like his own spirit link with Ansu, but cruder, a barely functional shared vision. In other words, someone was spying on humans 3 kilometers away through this bird. Ted's curiosity flared. He initiated a spirit intrusion, seeping his mind power into the raptor's brain. After tens of seconds, he bypassed the bird and its handler and tried to control the raptor to read its memories. The bird was magical but dim. Its mind thought only of food. Ted switched tactics, used the bird as a relay to reach its controller. Like hacking a server through a compromised node, he threaded through the thin mental defenses and, after 5 careful minutes, slipped into the controller's memories. The handler was a thin orc named Azza, about 1.8 meters tall, yellowish-green skin, scarred, a strong orc, and a beastmaster. From Azza's memories, Ted learned the orc social hierarchy. Half-orcs, 1.5 to 1.7 meters thin, light-sensitive, cannon fodder. Orcs, 1.7 to 1.9 meters, stronger than average humans, crude iron armor, and deadly clumsy weapons. Strong orcs, over 2 meters, muscular or possessing specialist skills like beastmastery, gunpowder weaponry, sharpshooting, assassination. And Olog-hai, reinforced trolls, over 4 meters, sunlight-resistant, armor-like skin, some 5 meters, used as siege beasts. The city's top fighters, the war chiefs, were 5 in number: Berserker, Forgemaster, Mystic, Arsonist, and Commander. Ted was especially interested in the Mystics, spellcasters who used rituals and sorcery that exacted a price in blood and death for commensurate power. There were only 6 Mystics in the city. That mattered. Mirror copying magic into mirror space was not straightforward. Physical data copied easily, but magical systems usually required the caster's cooperation. Ted wanted to capture a mystic alive and study him. If he had time, he could copy the city and even modern artillery into ideal land. But the Swedes were almost ready. 40 tanks, roughly 200 artillery pieces. If they didn't strike tonight, they would at dawn. Then those 200 guns might fire 10 rounds and erase the city. He had one precious night. Ted drifted through the streets. Garbage and bone scraps lay about. Buildings leaned and clustered with no plan. He watched the Mystics and selected one who seemed promising to capture when the bombardment began. Then he found something that revealed how blind he'd been. Near the city's edge was a semi-subterranean complex, enormous and heavily guarded. Even late at night, 7 or 8 orcs stood watch with torches and bonfires, oddly diligent. Orcs weren't known for discipline. This place must be important, grander than any war chief lair. Azza's memories had only given the name: Incubation Den. Ted slipped a control over a lone guard to search his memories. As expected, the guard knew the place inside out. Inside the den, rows upon rows of clay vat rose floor to ceiling, 5 tiers of pots over a meter tall, each surface covered with a thin membrane of transparent viscous fluid. Through it, he could see curled, brand-new forms waiting to be released. Orcs were grown. Ted felt both alarm and thrill. They weren't fungal orc space marines, at least, not the kind that could regrow from a speck, but they were produced in these cans. Roughly 800 new orcs every 3 months, with stillbirths and deformities culled on the spot. Some newborns became strong orcs, taller, stronger, or smarter. Most were half-orcs, cannon fodder, or laborers. A small city of 5,000 getting 800 new bodies every 3 months meant their numbers could double in 18 months. The reproductive rate was terrifying. If not for massive internal attrition, they might already dominate Middle-earth. Ted's hands twitched. These incubation pots were perfect raw material for modification, alchemical components already in convenient form. He imagined teleporting them into mirror space and running experiments. He restrained himself for the moment, however. Tonight was to establish ideal land under cover of darkness and copy whatever he could. Dawn came and the Swedish army struck. They ate breakfast at 8 a.m. and launched the attack at 10. The orcs, limited by their understanding, did not grasp the destructive power of artillery and tanks. They had scouted and prepared to fight, but expected bloody close-quarters combat. As they bared themselves to charge from the city gate, the artillery opened, not the 10 rounds Ted had feared, but 5. Perhaps Sweden was low on ammunition. 5 rounds from over 200 guns still meant roughly 1,000 shells, and they came in a 2-minute thunder. The city was pulverized. When the smoke cleared, less than 1,000 orcs remained. The rest were strewn across the ground. The walls were knocked down, and few buildings were left standing. The orcs were stunned. Only when tanks and IFVs pushed in did they react. They were ugly and terrifying in their own brutal way. The Berserker chief, blood red, veins bulging, muscles like knots, leaped out and charged, wielding 2 shattered axes. In a single bound, he covered 16 or 17 meters. 1/2 meter axe blade struck a tank's barrel and dented it with a resonant clang. Sparks flew. He didn't pause, whirling his axes like a storm, clanging them against metal. The tank crews were shocked. Nearby tanks, fearing nothing for friendly fire, unleashed coaxial machine guns. But the heavy rounds, thick as fingers, only grazed the berserker's hide, barely piercing the skin and not reaching his muscles. Was his defense that strong, or did he have a special resistance to ranged weapons? Before anyone could answer, a tank exploded in black roar. Friendly fire, it seemed. Someone had fired at it from the distance. It was the arsonist chief, pushing out a cast-iron crude cannon with a barrel as thick as a thigh. He'd fired at the tanks. Their firearms were primitive and did only marginal damage to armor, but they could still sow chaos. Then the Forgemaster chief appeared, one arm replaced with a circular saw-like mechanism, one eye a monocular device, steampunk cybernetic modifications. Ted craned his head to the sky. Something even more fearsome was coming. The commander-chief, an expert at boosting the morale and combat prowess of others, arrived not alone but astride a 5-meter-long flying dragon. At that moment, the crews inside the tanks hadn't looked up. Tanks aren't built for skywatching. The men in the armored vehicles, however, saw everything through the slit vision of their periscopes and viewports. 20 to 30 meters above the ruined town, huge beasts hovered. Not sleek dragons of legend, but ugly, thick-bodied wyverns with gnarled bumps across hides, more like crocodile skin than scales, a dull gray-green. Their heads were elongated, snake-like. Their wings were long and bat-like. A long, barbed tail lashed the air. One of them wore crude armor and rode like a general. The sight made Ted blurt, "Holy crap." They'd seriously underestimated these invaders. Sweden's command had known there were wizards in this world and that these monsters from elsewhere were thick-skinned, strong, and brutal. They'd assumed, arrogantly, that while wizardry was dangerous, it would be offset by modern firepower. A shell, a tank, and it was done. These orcs, they thought, were barbarians who only knew cold weapons. How wrong they were. 5 hunched figures in the ruined city confirmed the mistake. The robed orcs, draped in hides and bone, scarred and tattooed in ritual patterns, circled on a rise, leaning on bone and wood staves. Some sprinkled blood, some slit animal throats, some struck flints to start controlled fires. They began to cast. A column of black smoke rose from the ruins, a conscious, curling plume that drifted toward the steel hulls and seeped through every hatch seam. The smoke was no ordinary smoke. It was a crafted sorcery, the wolf smoke of berserker dung, orc blood, goblin bone powder, caustic reagents, and accelerant magic. A whiff produced a burning pain deep in the nose and throat, stinging exposed skin like thousands of hot needles. Tank crews felt their mouths and sinuses seize. Dozens gagged and clawed at their helmets. Within seconds, some men had to open hatches to breathe. The instant they stuck their heads out, a black feathered arrow, sleek and filthy, pierced them. Master archers had been waiting on the roofs and parapets. Swedish planners had expected their tanks to dominate from a distance, to shell and sit back. They had not planned on this kind of mixed assault, surviving hordes far beyond their estimates, flying beasts, and sorcery that could get inside metal. The black smoke choked crews. Several tanks stalled as men on board retched and blacked out. Firemasters rolled barrels of burning oil into position and set 2 tanks alight. Steel hulls would not burn quickly, but the crews could become iron barbecues. The wyvern commander roared from the sky. Orc blood surged. The brutes charged, roaring and waving crude weapons. Small arms fire and artillery boomed in reply, but bullets were far less devastating than anyone expected. Submachine guns often had to empty half a magazine to drop one half orc. They could take 5 or 6 hits and still stagger forward. Only sustained concentrated fire, large caliber rounds, or lucky vital shots felled them outright. A squad of flamethrower teams bought the defenders some space. 10-meter tongues of flame sealed off approaches and turned the front line into a furnace. Ted watched orcs step on mines and go airborne, then struggle to get up covered in mangled wounds that would have crippled a human. Legs shredded, bones broken, but the orcs still pushed on. One berserker, blown 3 or 4 meters by a mine, dragged himself to his feet with dozens of lacerations on his legs, picked up a huge saber and kept charging. It was demoralizing to see. Artillery still mattered. A shell cratered into a giant berserker who had been hacking at a tank and reduced him to mincemeat. If the massed guns could keep wearing the horde down, there was hope. But trench warfare against these creatures would be catastrophic if they made it in. Then the wizards did what they did best. A Swedish wizard flicked his wand and intoned Defindo. One half-orc was cleanly torn apart, head, torso, and limbs separating in a single, ghastly instant. Another cast Howling Gale, and a wind slammed 7 or 8 charging orcs backward, hurling them into the mud. The Swedish commander ordered sustained artillery on the orc rear and concentrated flamethrower and machine gun fire on the front. Heavy machine guns, with a second of relentless fire, could shred the larger brutes. The ugly wyvern, ridden by the commander, endured the staccato of submachine gun rounds and spat a mouthful of yellowish-green viscous bile. The corrosive spray spread over a wide arc. On steel it hissed and smoked. The impact was horrifying. Soldiers burned and liquefied in seconds. 20 meters of trench were sterilized by the spray. Screams and the smell of melting flesh rose like fog. From the ruined city, the 5 casters did not stop. Under their rights, about a dozen black orbs the size of trash bags formed in midair, cores glimmering red, ringed in black vapor, and fell like slow meteors. The orbs made a soft puff when they hit, not an explosion, but the sound of a burst bladder, and their shrouds unfurled into thick biological smoke. Wherever that haze settled, men writhed and coughed. It spread like a plague. Ted had watched from the rear for a while, collecting data, measuring, hoping to let the Swedes and their guns do the hard work. He realized the situation was worse than he'd thought. If he hid any longer, humanity's losses would be far greater than necessary. Exposure was inevitable. It was time to act. He stepped out, materialized in midair, and released his signature Patronus, a black dragon that shot from his wand and met the wyvern commander in the sky. The Patronus opened a maw wide as a house and swallowed both the dark dragon and its rider in a single gulp. As a form of spirit magic, the Patronus was not bound by physical rules. It compacted inside its belly and ballooned into a comical, rounded shape, short, squat, and full. It even burped. Below, orcs and soldiers gaped. Ted dismissed the Patronus to let it digest, then drew a circle in the air with his wand. Inside it, a small, roiling black cloud swelled and spread. The sky darkened, wind screamed, thunder rolled. The battlefield, once morning bright, turned suddenly toward evening as a cold shadow fell. Then ice began to fall. Not gentle snow, ice blades and snow swords, blocks of ice the size of heads, shards a meter long and as thick as an arm, and a fine, violent flurry of white. It was as though the Arctic had been poured out of the cloud. In minutes, the orcs were hammered by a blizzard of supernatural density, freezing air, slamming ice, and cutting shards. The magical saturation meant that unless you could burrow underground, there was no surviving it. In under 3 minutes after Ted intervened, the orc numbers collapsed from over 800 to a little over 100. 2 kilometers of ground were buried under half a meter of ice and snow. The scale of death was absolute. A system chime sounded in Ted's head. Ding! You have completed the quest. Orcs must die. Reward, 3,300 experience. Card acquired. Strong orc cultivation jar. He didn't linger. Ted gathered data, collected orc blood and tissue samples, and most pragmatically, harvested the souls of more than 200 dead Swedish soldiers. He saw no honor in leaving them to nothing. Better they became NPCs in the ideal land, their essences repurposed into new stories. He picked out a dozen whose profiles pleased him for special training, a transmigration-style simulation package in the lower tiers of the ideal land's dreamscape. In those layered dreams, time flowed at over 4,000 times normal speed. One night felt like more than 10 years. Ted checked their dream runs and laughed grimly. One turned into a peerless scumbag genius. Others rose to lead factions, command armies, or end up as tavern gigolos. Fate varied wildly. He handed the soul data and profiles to Park with instructions on placement and plausible memory masking. No direct hints they'd collectively transmigrated into this world. Back in the real world, Ted's 3-minute blizzard had been captured on video. He hadn't intended a spectacle, but the footage spread across Europe. Wizards recognized the Black Dragon Patronus at once. His style was known. Governments shivered. One smooth spell by a young wizard could blanket a city in ice. This was a weather weapon. The footage also highlighted the alarming fact that firearms did far less damage to orcs than expected. Swedish analyses of orc corpses later verified what battlefield doctors had seen. Bullets often failed to penetrate or stopped in muscle. When compared to equivalent kinetic force delivered by cold weapons, firearms did only about one-third to one-half the damage. The implication was chilling. These creatures had some special resistance to firearms. The magic world took notice. Ted's name spread. Many influential figures and organizations eyed him as a figure of terrifying power and enormous potential. The invasion proved what some already suspected. Secrecy around magical affairs was unraveling. Strange creatures, magical anomalies, and cross-world incursions had become too frequent to hide forever. The statute of secrecy could not long hold if events like this continued. Muggles were not so easy to mislead indefinitely. Ted didn't worry about geopolitics. He counted his gains. The card he'd earned read, Strong Orc Cultivation Jar read, Item Card. Place a Strong Orc Cultivation Jar on the battlefield. It produces strong orcs of random professions and characteristics at a rate of 1 per minute to fight for you for 24 hours. Maximum placement time, 5 hours. Cooldown, 7 days. Note, they are ugly and brutal, but very useful. Results are mainly random and not very stable. He replicated the physical cans in the ideal land for safe, repeatable examination. Inside the game, he planned to open them again and again and run gene modulation and surgical trials. Human experimentation felt wrong to him. Orcs in a simulated environment were ethically easier to justify. He already had a newt bloodline to hand. Why not try integrating it with orc genetics? He grinned at the possibilities. He'd also taken the orc corpses and the transportable canned orc units like blind boxes. You never knew what would come out. Lethal brutes, weaklings, cunning scouts. He would experiment, catalog traits, and, if he felt like it, make something better. Ted left the battlefield as he came, unseen, purposeful, and unconcerned with the political aftermath. He'd done his part, gained invaluable data and artifacts, and the world would now know a name, Blizzard. As he made for the horizon, already planning gene protocols, he muttered, half to himself, half as a promise, "Are strong orcs so amazing? Come and see my super orcs." 412, Director Ken's Magic Notes. Notice, Magic World will undergo system maintenance at 2 a.m. tonight to add additional game content. Players, please explore on your own. Every Wizard player currently locked in fierce battles in the game received the in-game mail. The update raised the level cap to 40 and opened new maps, quests, and dungeons. Research systems and sub-professions were granted more permissions. Many veteran wizards were suddenly keen on doing research inside the game. After all, it's safe and cheap. Real-world magical research is dangerous. In the British magical world, 8 to 10 unlucky experimenters die every year. That's a huge loss for a community that isn't producing large numbers of successors. Without Muggle-born wizards replenishing the ranks, British magic might have collapsed long ago. In the game, protections were far better. Even if your character died, you could just make a new one. Materials were cheap. Experimental costs were a fraction of what they'd be in reality. No money? Do quests, fight monsters, earn gold. Easy. But Ted wasn't going to let everyone freeload. If the old wizards poured research into the game, all those data and experimental procedures would be logged and effectively handed over to him for free. They didn't need to be forced. They offered it willingly. Besides, those old wizards liked to make low-level alt accounts for experiments. They didn't want to bother with quests or fights, and they didn't mind if an alt died. Could that be allowed? No way. If you're not fighting monsters, you're freeloading off me. That was shameful freeloading. They had to be made to level up, because higher-level research functions only unlocked with character progress. With the new level 40 content, players had to grind. Reaching the cap was only the beginning. That's when the game truly started. Ted had even added new content himself. Ta-da! Follower system. Initial release, Strong Orcs. After a few days of testing, Ted realized solo experiments were too slow. It's easy to go from frugal to indulgent, but hard to go back the other way, he thought. So he launched a new welfare feature, the follower system. Players could buy strong orc cultivation jars, hatch young strong orcs, and raise them. Ted stocked the system store with cultivation materials he'd vetted, magical animal bloodlines, surgical modifications, magic item combinations, engineering upgrades. Strong orc cultivation wasn't simple. It involved many branches, so he needed a lot of data. Ted also opened a new map and added a faction, the Strong Orc City, led by a super strong orc war chief named Newt. This was a world boss zone, not a dungeon boss, an open-world challenge. Newt commanded over 2,000 strong orcs. No one could reasonably beat him alone. They'd need hundreds of players. After clearing those 2,000, players would discover the war chief himself was far worse. One punch could wipe out 10 junior wizards. Ha ha! Hope the players like it. Ted intentionally seeded the game with otherworld creatures from this world, so wizards could face them safely in-game and gain experience rather than dying in reality. He was also pushing online shopping, trying to lure stay-at-home witches onto the web to gossip, shop, and socialize. Logistics weren't a problem in the magic world, so the rest was easy. Platforms like Xianyu website and Taodong.com were excellent for circulation. Previously, the magic world's economy had been small and insular. To buy certain things, you had to travel abroad. Now, log into Ideal Land and you could see goods in the virtual world. Even food could be tasted and clothes tried on virtually. Ted persuaded Grigorovich, the German wand master, and Basil Jonker, the American wand merchant, to open online shops. Little wizards could try on wands in Ideal Land and order them online or buy offline. Ollivander didn't join. He was stubborn and old-fashioned, probably worried his business would suffer. His wand-making philosophy was rigid. Only dragon heartstring, phoenix feather, and unicorn tail hair as cores. Stable, but not distinctive. Ideal Land had nearly 200,000 active users now. Ted had harvested a lot of experience and spirit power from it. He was watching for large magic net nodes around which to forge magic rings. The largest leyline node in Britain was Hogwarts, but Ted thought he needed continent-level nodes to do what he wanted. Unnoticed, the ice and snow melted. People's coats grew thinner. Sunny slopes showed hints of green. Spring had arrived. April 1st, April Fool's for most, was for Ted the day new knowledge arrived. Ding. Talent. Otherworld knowledge, triggered, discovered, Kenneth L. Melloy Archibald's Magic Notes. Kenneth L. Melloy Archibald's Magic Notes read, Notes on Studying and Researching Magic by Kenneth L. Melloy Archibald, one of the 12 Lords of the Clock Tower, Lord of the Mineralogy Department, and lecturer in the Necromancy Department. His life's learning and magical research, recorded. Exchange cost, 899 experience points. Kenneth? Ted didn't immediately recall the name, but one of the 12 Lords of the Clock Tower jogged his memory. Director Kenneth, one of the biggest victims of the Fourth Holy Grail War. The famous Director Kenneth, the poor fellow who lost everything, and even his life. Although the notes were only red quality, Kenneth's reputation was extraordinary. He had been a young professor with staggering theoretical depth, one of the 12 Lords at a young age, a composite wind and water attribute with superb fluidity in magic. Hailed a prodigy since childhood, a lecturer in the Necromancy Department, a color-ranked magic user. Reynes had evaluated that, had he lived, Kenneth would likely have reached grand rank. Even Waver, his student and successor, the one whose actions led to Kenneth's death, felt regret when he organized Kenneth's research findings. Kenneth excelled not only in necromancy, but in many branches of magic. He was considered the strongest master by magic level during the Fourth Holy Grail War. But he wasn't a combat strategist. Why would a teacher enter a war full of schemers? He had fortified his building and thought himself safe, but he didn't expect Kiritsugu Emiya to blow the place up. He thought he was having a quiet drink and admiring the view from a high window, then his base was obliterated. He died, but he didn't die in vain. There was an internet analogy circulating. A renowned specialist in geotechnical mechanics, known for theoretical work that didn't favor next year's Academy elections, reluctantly entered the 4th Geotechnical Mechanics Practice Competition in Guizhou. The contest was about operating excavators, earthwork, foundation demolitions, and mountain blasting. After a dispute, Director Kenneth was struck down by a construction worker named Wei from Afghanistan, who hit him with a red brick. His fiancée ran off with his graduate student. Sob. Ted reviewed Kenneth's youthful arrogance and diligence, then the tragedy of his ambush and fall in the Holy Grail War, and the heartbreaking detail, his fiancée falling for the heroic spirit he'd summoned. Too tragic. It was almost unbearable. But Kenneth's notes were a treasure. Ted hadn't expected him to have researched so much. The achievements were remarkable. Just by acquiring this knowledge, Ted's rune magic and alchemy both leveled up. That was rare. This meant Kenneth's knowledge was solid and systematic, directly elevating Ted's theoretical base. Kenneth's mastery of the rune system, a Nordic foundation, improved Ted's magic rune capability, and Kenneth's expertise in alchemy boosted Ted's alchemical understanding. The notes covered magic circuits, magic crests, magic tools, magic workshops, barriers, ritual magic, reinforcement techniques, puppet magic, familiar summoning, magical eye modification, necromancy, all the fundamentals Kenneth had explored deeply. As a necromancy lecturer, he had exceptional knowledge of summoning. Necromancy could mean invoking spirits or inviting gods, beings ranging from heroic spirits of history and myth to spirits of nature, even departed souls. The pinnacle was summoning heroic spirits, breaking dimensional rules with miracle force to drag figures from history or the collective unconscious into the present and command them with command spells. Though profound, Kenneth's necromancy wasn't entirely safe in the world's current condition. Reckless summoning could cause something awful. "Don't summon Cthulhu," Ted muttered to himself. Should he combine chaos magic to create a virtual spirit and then summon Ultraman Tiga? The possibilities were dizzying. Ted planned to carefully sort and transcribe the notes. Magic knowledge from the Type Moon world meshed well with his own magic system. There were countless manipulable points. Take magic circuits. If he used human alchemy to inscribe magic circuits into ordinary bodies, could they generate magic? Could people become wizards or pseudo-superpowered beings? He'd test the strong orcs first, master etching methods for circuits and crests, then add them to the game store and let players experiment. Strong orc followers would get a whole new development path. Congratulations, new market. There were also notes on magic tools and workshops. The former let you craft items with special attributes and abilities. The latter taught how to set up arrays to amplify the caster's power. In fantasy, high-level mages have magic towers that magnify strength tenfold. Kenneth's magic workshop wasn't that extreme, but it wasn't trivial either. Besides the follower system, Ted thought about a housing system. Let players explore possibilities of magic workshops in-game. He'd hit the jackpot with ideal land. Throughout April, while running dungeons with friends to improve synergy, Ted researched the material at hand. Strong orc cultivation had hit a stride. 1/3 of players now had tall, sturdy, strong orc bodyguards. Squishy ranged and magic classes finally had their own personal tanks. Players' creativity exploded. In 10 days, Ted collected 12 solidly different strong orc cultivation and modification routes. An optimal commoner version for cost-effectiveness, a Tycoon super strong orc manual for maximum combat, and a loser's exclusive strong orc magic user modification for oddball builds. Sometimes Ted had to admire the masses' creativity, and sometimes their fetishes were genuinely terrifying. Ted spent the week making animated magic golems. He'd accumulated years of tech and experience in golem and puppet research, and players' inventions had considerably enriched his database. After obtaining knowledge on animated constructs from the Pharaoh Gold Notes, and now Kenneth's insights on Type Moon puppets, he dove in. A silver-haired girl in a black and white maid dress with small black wings opened her mouth. "Father dear." Another had a mechanical magic orb floating beside her, its voice an echoey electronic monotone. "The magic golem is angry." A third wore fluffy fox ears and a large tail. "Please command Daji as you wish." While Ted was manufacturing animated real-life figures, something big happened at the Ministry of Magic. A wizard tried to break into the Department of Mysteries collection room, a vault of strange, undeciphered items the Ministry had gathered. In recent years, otherworld infiltration had added even more anomalies. But the intruder had a clear target, the storage of prophecy orbs. After a prophecy was made, prophets saved the contents in crystal balls. This person wanted one particular prophecy, but Ted had already tampered with things. He captured the intruder alive, but the person turned out to be a puppet under control. "It seems Lord Voldemort has started taking an interest in that prophecy again," someone muttered. "He wants to know the latter half." Speaking of which, this guy was supposedly headed to Siberia to plant potatoes, yet he was still watching his old hometown? Dumbledore, the pressure you're putting on him isn't nearly strong enough. 413, Global Finals. We are the champions. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the grand finals of the Magic World 5v5 Arena. I'm your commentator, Little Handsome, and I'm your commentator, Little Beauty. I'm Dahan. After a year of streaming events, the Golden Cauldron Potion Championship, the Spanish Wizard Dueling Competition, the Ideal Land Forum was finally hosting another major live event, the Arena Tournament inside Magic World. Out of 160,000 Wizard players worldwide, more than 30,000 signed up. 6,000 teams of 5 battled through a dozen-plus rounds to reach the global grand finals. On the red side were the Hogwarts Warriors, the 5 friends minus Ted Epiphany. Ted was buried in research, so the others had been grinding together in the game, testing tactics, correcting mistakes, refining coordination. They'd endured losses and frustrations, but eventually formed a team whose timing and strength rivaled many veteran players and even some darker, more insidious squads. The audience had nicknamed them the Hogwarts Warriors. Their official name was Hogwarts Companions. Their opponents on the blue side were Mana Above All. Unlike Harry and Hermione's mostly student team, Mana Above All were older. The youngest was surprisingly Crumb, but the oldest was nearly 50. Crumb had reappeared, now with a girlfriend, hopefully putting the past behind him. Ted had taken a quick look at the blue team's roster. Besides Crumb, there were 4 other members, each with a few blemishes on their records and all proficient in dark arts. 2 Germans, an Italian, a Hungarian, and a Bulgarian, practically an axis of mana. Ted suspected Grindelwald had had a hand in assembling them. After all, Professor Geller had been stirring things up off stage. Anything that drew a tenth of the world's wizards was going to attract attention. If Grindelwald could use Ideal Land and Magic World to spread influence, recruit fans, promote ideology through game stars, it would be more subtle and effective than old-fashioned violence. Still, Ted wouldn't stop it. He had set the rules, and he was going to enforce them. He was content to let the game run and watch the players bloom. In pure real-world power, the blue team looked stronger. Older, battle-hardened, and with a level 14 Dark Wizard among them, a masterclass player. In reality, the Hogwarts Companions were lower on the scale. Hermione and Harry were strong but not masters. Neville, their tank, was only a level 8 wizard, level 5 warrior, and Harry a level 9 wizard, level 2 spellshaper. But this was a game tournament. What mattered was in-game stats. Both teams were level 40 and equipped with top-tier dungeon graduation gear, among the fastest to reach that status, thanks in part to Ted's hidden help. Some would call that cheating. Ted preferred reasonable use of social connections. What Hogwarts Companions did have was something the older assembled blue team didn't: tacit understanding. Harry, Hermione, Neville, and the others had fought side by side for years. Real battles, dungeon runs, countless scrapes. They had reflexes and instincts that only long friendship could forge. That kind of synergy was what made the finals must-watch. The tournament had been long. Preliminaries, knockouts, group stages, quarterfinals, semifinals, each round was a test. Fans of both sides argued furiously online. Red supporters said the 5 of them had overcome dragons and impossible odds. Blue fans fired back, pointing out that the 5 had never been tested against real masters and that Ted wasn't even on the roster. The same argument circled endlessly. Ted's absence became the go-to rebuttal. Ted himself found it fitting. If he played, his presence would overshadow his friends. Let them have the spotlight. Losing a match at their age wouldn't be the end of the world. Ted was enjoying the online squabbles when Parker interrupted with bad news. "My great and despicable master of leak harvesting, I found something worrying." "Speak." "Someone set up a dark web for gambling." "What? Gambling? Darkness and vice." Ted slammed the table. The rise of Ideal Land, the Leyline Magic Network, and the Magic Virtual Network had opened all sorts of opportunities and loopholes. Wizards had tried to replicate or exploit the system, build their own small Ideal Lands or illegal forums. Parker had been policing permissions and shutting down anything that wasn't sanctioned, but a number of dark sites found ways to hide. It was deliberate, small, controlled pockets of vice to bait troublemakers and monitor them. Still, a gambling ring was dangerous. Parker's quick trace revealed the organizers. Ludo Bagman was directly involved. The old gambling addict, after losing everything at the Quidditch World Cup and the Triwizard Tournament, had fled debts and run afoul of Gringotts' loan-sharking fairies. Yet Bagman had charm. When cornered, he'd convinced his creditors to let him try something big. They'd made a killing during the Spanish wizard dueling competition offline, and now they were going online, where the audience numbers were far larger. The backers were the goblin revivalists, trying to launder influence and funds into Ted's territory. "Keep an eye on them," Ted ordered. "Break into the dark web and seize the gambling funds before the final match finishes. Notify the various ministries of magic. The Goblin Ring is running gambling operations through the network, and publish everything on Bagman, his history of organizing bets, match fixing in his Quidditch days. Shame him." "Master, your cunning is unmatched," Parker replied. Back in the arena, the commentators were dissecting the first match. Congratulations to the red team, the Hogwarts Buddies, on taking the first victory. They were well prepared, tactically deceptive, seized control early, and expanded their advantage through flawless teamwork. The blue team seemed overconfident. They were a little disjointed and paid for it. Crumb went down at 1 minute 30, and the healer didn't even have time to react. The red team made a decisive 1-for-5 trade. Only Neville fell. What adjustments will blue make? Fans spammed the chat with praise and taunts. The finals were best of 5. Taking the first game gave the red team breathing room. The blue team adjusted talents, swapped equipment and items, and deployed prepped tactics. They took the second round, evening the score. The third map favored the Hogwarts Buddies' style, terrain and mechanisms they knew how to exploit. After 32 brutal minutes, they wore down the blue captain, who finally cracked under attrition. Jerry Epiphany executed a clean assassination combo and took the veteran down. The tactic, dragging out a complex battlefield to exhaust the oldest player's spirit, had been planned. Even though the 50-something opponent wasn't actually frail in-game, prolonged, high-intensity guerrilla warfare eroded the clarity of play, and the captain began to falter. The fourth round was the opposite. The veteran captain found a map that suited his strengths, seized the high ground, and unleashed a barrage of restraints and large-scale spells. Over 8 minutes, the blue team bombarded Harry's side, leaving only Neville standing. Neville, a paladin, took everything. He endured being focus-fired and surrounded for 30 seconds with no complaints. The chat exploded with admiration. "I thought Neville was a bit dim at the Triwizard Tournament, but here, he's a real man. I'm a Neville fan now. Neville is the paladin Jinchuriki. I want his babies." Someone had to reel back the enthusiasm. With 2 wins apiece, the final map decided everything. The Savage Forest, the arena's largest map, full of monster camps and resource points. Both teams spent over 10 minutes finding and fighting for control, then another 10 of guerrilla skirmishes, and finally a brutal 10 minutes of direct engagement. At the 56th minute, Harry transformed into a 1,000-armed blue sorcerer avatar and traded out the Italian and Hungarian players. Only Crumb, low on health and mana, and Neville remained. Crumb blew his trump card, the Wild Horn. A giant wolf, man-tall and over 2 meters long, leaped from the void and prostrated itself beside him. Neville used Holy Light and recovered. Golden radiance flowed, his injuries and fatigue melting away. He gripped his wand. With golden energy, it became a greatsword over 2 meters long. Neville charged. The wolf dissipated into blue motes, and a magic boomerang stuck into Crumb's back, an ambush trick Neville had hidden. If an honest man ambushes, who would expect it? Crumb's head dropped, and he vanished in a beam of light back to the ancient forest spawn. Neville staggered, kneeled, the light sword fading as his mana ran out and collapsed, but he had lasted until the end. Congratulations to the red team, the Hogwarts Buddies, champions of the arena. The chat erupted. "We are the champions." Fans flooded the forums. Ted, lying on the sofa, watched his buddies lift the trophy and smiled. They'd earned this glory. The players' excitement sent spirit power surging, a harvest for Ted. He asked Parker, casually, "What happened to the gambling ring?" "Don't worry, Master. Bagman has been arrested. The funds were confiscated." "Good. Anything else interesting recently?" "Anything new and fun? A new web novel has appeared." "A web novel?" Ted blinked. Of course there would be one eventually. "Want to see it? It's already popular." Parker sent the cover. A crude illustration of a golden armored goddess descending. The blurb promised, an otherworldly goddess cultivates for decades, only to be ripped open by an ignorant magic youth who absorbs her essence and rockets to level 99. Ted read it and sighed. Critics would have a field day. The internet would hang a sheep's head and sell dog meat in every niche before long. 414. My Way is Complete. Ted felt a stab of disgust reading a web novel that was selling dog meat under the guise of lamb. He hadn't expected that even with the magic web's one-step leap straight into video and live streaming, shoddy web novels would still proliferate. Well, that's the thing about text. It leaves room for the reader's imagination, while video pins everything down. Maybe it's time to open a literary section on the forum. But titles like The Story of One Woman and Seven Men that turn out to be glorified Calabash Brothers fanfics when you click them deserve punishment. People excitedly open the page with their pants half off, and you give them this? Animals! Animals! Oh, right, I also need to restrict those overproducing authors, limit them to 4,000 words a day so they won't crowd the rankings. Wahahaha! It had been half a year since Ted decided to develop Ideal Land into a harvest field for leaks, easy marks, and the plan was already showing results. The in-house systems had gathered a huge number of successful cases, experimental data, and solutions. For new potions alone, 26 formulas had already surfaced. A dozen of them were useless, but the rest included several genuinely practical breakthroughs. That kind of output was unheard of in the magic world in recent years. The Wolfsbane potion had become the most notable potion achievement among British wizards lately. Only one significant potion in 7 or 8 years showed how stagnant magical research had been. Besides potions, the community had contributed to new magic tools, simplifications and workarounds for existing tools, and improved alchemical formulas. The targeted experiments Ted needed had been guided into players' hands through quests, NPC recommendations, and other incentives. That saved Ted at least 1,000 hours of bench time, an understatement since thousands of players had contributed, each spending 30 to 50 hours on research. Whether it was the water release magic Ted wanted, or sealing and barrier techniques from golem magic to studies in biological transformation, even the newly discovered orc transformations, players had pushed progress forward. Some had even successfully transformed into what the community nicknamed Mystic Circuit Orc Casters. One wizard, apparently wealthy and reckless, had experimented by killing over 60 orc followers, each purchase costing 2 galleons in game currency, to test and build a new type of orc caster. That was just the price of the orc cultivation tanks from the in-game shop. The rest of his experimental costs hadn't been counted. But he had the talent. He managed to create an alternate Mystic Circuit orc caster. Previous orc casters had been Ted's standard orc mystic copies, dark magic-centered, focused on curses, control, and harassment. This rich player instead bred a weakened newt-type orc follower, a super orc, and etched magic circuits into its body. It only had a pitiful 5 magic circuits, but it became a caster. He then bought a magic engraving for reinforcement magic and turned the super orc into a reinforced super orc. Reinforcement magic isn't high-end per se, but properly applied, it's devastating, already integrated with offense and defense, and incredibly fast. Now the muscle-bound orc was even stronger and slaughtered everything in its path. Excellent, Ted thought. Note this experimental plan. Later, I want to make a reinforced newt super orc with 50 magic circuits. It must be stronger than the original newt. Ted had more than 20 major magical projects moving forward in an orderly fashion. If he wanted to accelerate a project, he just tweaked relevant quest rewards and tendencies in the game. It was immensely satisfying. Doing research alone left you just a researcher. Set up a laboratory, and you get a team. The Lord Voldemort puppet the Department of Mysteries had captured earlier had been quietly handled by Ted. Voldemort, having failed to obtain the second half of the prophecy, would not give up. But the prophecy orb had been taken by Ted long ago, unless Voldemort could pry it out of Dumbledore's hands. And Dumbledore had found work elsewhere. Ted had assumed that after the temporary victory over Voldemort, Dumbledore would return to Hogwarts. But Dumbledore was the foremost figure in the magic world, honorary president of the International Confederation of Wizards, the greatest white wizard of the age. He had a lot on his plate, especially now. Less than a month after Ted resolved the Swedish Orc City incident, two more Orc City-like incidents had occurred. One in Cape Town stirred things up, but it was suppressed quickly. Africa's communications are uneven, and the magic world acted fast. Grindelwald intervened personally and resolved the matter in under an hour, leaving no public fuss. Ted originally thought Africa would be easy to handle, but every region had its own complications. On the plains of Central Africa, small factions of resistance from the Saint organization had appeared, and most of their forces weren't wizards at all but magical beasts, countless and intelligent, many as sapient as humans. Africa had always been rich in magical beasts, but now legends spoke of a true king of the plains. Otherworldly races, satyr-like beings, boar-men, centaurs, and minotaurs had appeared sporadically. Many animals had been infected and awakened by some magic. They had human speech, wear clothes, and use tools, effectively animal-type intelligent magical races. The Plains King had united these otherworldly creatures and infected beasts into a formidable force. Saints could hold cities and tribes, but what could a band of wizards do on the open plains? They had been stalled for over 2 months. The king was said to be a magically empowered lion of enormous strength. Grindelwald's plan had been meticulous, and his execution almost perfect, but even he couldn't solve it. Meanwhile, Dumbledore was busy elsewhere. A large-scale otherworldly incursion in western Poland had taken place less than 15 kilometers from a town and couldn't be ignored. The International Confederation sent over 60 powerful wizards within 2 hours, but they couldn't take it down. The area was enclosed by mountains and swarming with bizarre, dangerous monsters. Each creature's level was around 3 to 6, but there were overwhelming numbers covering sky and earth. Their forms were indescribable, as if born in another world. When the wizards arrived, many monsters had already fled, acting more on instinct than intelligence. Some broke into a Muggle town and slaughtered at least 2,000 people within an hour. Local armed forces tried to resist, but like with the orcs, conventional weaponry was relatively ineffective. Hastily assembled police and militia had no heavy weapons. They were scattered and would have been wiped out if not for special troop carriers and retreat strategies. Once the wizards arrived, they stopped worrying about exposing magic. They sealed off monsters and cleared the town to protect the civilians. An hour later, Dumbledore showed up. The monster numbers hadn't dropped much, and the defenders were exhausted. He finally used a powerful transfiguration to raise several small mountains from the ground, blocking a mountain pass and temporarily suppressing the feral onslaught. Dumbledore was tied up with the incident. In fact, incidents large and small had been occurring worldwide. It was likely the monster siege could no longer be hidden. The existence and actions of wizards were becoming precarious. With the urgency and lack of time for damage control, videos had already spread internationally. It was 1996. Muggles had the internet now. Ted checked the anomaly reports Parker had pulled from the forum. There were countless incidents. The situation was escalating fast. How would the International Confederation handle negotiations with high-level Muggle officials? Should they inform the public about the truth? If they didn't, distrust would grow, and people would prepare for war and famine. Understandable, given the unpredictable threat of deadly creatures appearing overnight. As for whether to reveal the existence of wizards, that could still be delayed. The videos showed wizards flying on broomsticks and waving wands. But when dinosaurs and sewer monsters were breaking into homes, what did a few wizards look like to the public? They would be just another piece of a much stranger world. Wizards were indigenous to this world too, coexisting for millennia, but few could explain that under the current pressure. Ted glanced at his experience pool and saw he'd leveled up. In a situation like this, power mattered more than ever. He had unknowingly accrued 220,000 experience points, most of it from Ideal Land, where millions of monsters were being killed daily by players. Ted could gain 1,000 points a day just by idle accumulation. If he personally completed in-game research tasks, he could pull in even more experience. Leveling up from 14 to 15 required 105,000 XP, and to 16 required 120,000. With his talent reduced costs, he could level up twice. System: Upgrade my wizard profession 2 levels. Ding, your wizard profession has leveled up to level 15, gaining 1 attribute point, 1 skill point. Ding, your wizard profession has leveled up to level 16, gaining 1 attribute point, 1 skill point, 1 talent point. A level 16 wizard was already a pillar of the magic world. Ted added 2 attribute points to Spirit, bringing it to 25, probably among the highest scores, surpassed only by Dumbledore and a few centenarian wizards. 2 skill points. His spellcraft was only level 7, and that was becoming a bottleneck for many experiments. For soul work and other delicate operations, a low spellcraft simply couldn't handle it. He immediately raised spellcraft to level 9. From now on, he would be a spellmaster. Magic would be at his command. Then came talent drawing. 3 red-bordered cards appeared in his mind. No need to consider level differences. The first card showed a wizard in a pointed hat, a spell erupting from his wand, while 3 or 4 ghostly wands cast different spells around him. Talent card allows you to cast different spells simultaneously. The lower the spell difficulty, the higher your mastery, and the more spells you can cast at once. Note, let the torrent of spells drown your enemies. The second card depicted a hand holding a wand, shooting 3 parallel beams of spelllight, multiple casting. Talent card allows you to cast the same spell multiple times at once. The lower the spell difficulty, the higher your mastery, and the more simultaneous casts you can produce. Note, you can block with 1, what about 3? 10. The third card showed a wizard shaping a ball of magic between 2 hands, molding it like clay. Talent card allows you to shape magic under your control. You may alter a spell's form at will. The lower the spell difficulty and the higher your mastery, the lower the mana cost and the greater the degree of reshaping possible. Note, that ice arrow? I turned it into a new form. Hope you like it. All 3 were tempting. Ted discarded multiple casting first. If one spell couldn't solve a problem, duplicating it rarely would. Magic wasn't a cannon to be spammed. Spell Torrent was flashy and useful against weaker foes, but impractical against threats he couldn't handle with a single well-crafted spell. He chose the last card. Wizards thrived on trickery. The ability to freely alter spells would confuse enemies. He imagined taking an ice arrow and turning it into an exploding shard cloud, a freezing mist, a viscous trap. It would be maddeningly unpredictable. He already had the magic transformation talent, purple, to change spell attributes. Combining that with form shaping would be perfect. You think it's an ice arrow? Sorry, it's now an explosive fireball, a petrifying spray, a sticky fog. He selected the card. Magic shaping red, he announced inwardly. While Ted leveled and planned, the world continued to convulse. Far to the southeast of Luzon Island in the Philippines, Mount Mayon, famed as one of the planet's most perfectly conical volcanoes, had been smoking. In the prior 6 hours, it erupted a dozen times, and more than 30 tremors had rattled the region within 12 hours. When Ted leveled up, Mayon had its first lava flow. It was small, but thick smoke billowed from the crater, and deep rumbles could be heard even from helicopters. Muggle reporters were filming live from the air, their helicopters bucking in the updrafts and unable to approach. Local authorities had begun evacuations. That volcano couldn't hold it much longer. Coincidentally, Iceland in the North Atlantic was shaking. The tremors weren't initially violent, but the ground quivered persistently. City roads cracked, a segment of highway visibly rose by 20 centimeters, and large-scale evacuations were ordered. The local government declared a state of emergency. A volcano might erupt within days. Over the next 24 hours, the area registered as many as 1,400 quakes, far worse than the Philippines. As Ted observed the patterns in Iceland, a sudden clarity struck him. The opportunity had arrived. My path is complete. 415. Ring of Mind Control. Ted had always been planning to forge his own one ring, but the requirements were astronomical. The conditions for crafting such an item dwarfed anything that ordinary rings of power could compare to. At this point, rings of power were becoming niche, endgame equipment for players. Everyone strove to craft rings tuned to their own skill systems. Ted had amassed more than 900 unique, valuable ring blueprints over the past 2 years, and while a ring of power was formidable, none of them significantly amplified what he already could do. With his current strength, Ordinary enemies never forced him to go all out, so mundane magic items were unnecessary. If he was going to wear something, it had to be top tier, something like Dumbledore's Elder Wand or Voldemort's Serpent Staff. Only then would Ted's combat power truly jump. Anything smaller would be negligible. Even Sauron had to be exceptionally powerful to make his one ring. He poured most of his power into it. Ted estimated he'd need to be at least level 20 to hit the threshold. He had just leveled up and was still 4 levels short. Worse, if he injected his own power into the ring during forging, his level would plunge, maybe even down to level 10. But Ted had a workaround. He could use the ideal land to accumulate experience and siphon it into the ring. Why waste his own power when he could tap others? Let the players suffer a little, and I'll take the credit. Materials weren't the main issue. Ted had scavenged countless rare components from bargain hunts and otherworld excursions. The final requirement was location. Both forging and destroying a One Ring demanded an immense magic convergence point. Hogwarts was already the largest magic hub in Britain, but he'd been searching Europe and Africa for something bigger, a continental node. Then, unexpectedly, the news came from the delivery room. Iceland was about to give birth. Otherworld infiltration was a serious problem. If monsters or alien flora bled through rifts, that could be dealt with. But the terrifying cases were terrain invasions, like the Land of Fire Ted had seen, where vast spaces were hollowed out and molten regions disrupted ecosystems. Whole swathes of the English Highlands still ran 3 to 5 degrees warmer because of past anomalies. There were resurrection pyramids in Cairo, enormous sieges in the Polish mountains, like inserting a new puzzle piece into a finished picture and wrecking the fit. Repeated spatial ruptures were cutting this world with a blunt knife. Iceland's geothermal upheaval, possibly tied to otherworld infiltration, had formed a massive subterranean magic node, continent level. It was precisely the kind of convergence he needed. In the Ideal Land virtual training room, Ron shouted, "Get ready, I'm coming." Jerry answered, "I've been ready for a long time. Bring it on." Ted and Hermione had just logged in and overheard the exchange. They exchanged surprised looks. Ted thought, Ron's been single for more than half a year, right? Hermione, what about Jerry? No Sherry around. No way. Their friendship is pure. Hermione, why not? This is Britain. The two of them found Ron piloting his prototype mech against Jerry's stealth build, testing controls. The match started chaotic. Jerry vanished into the shadows beneath his feet, only to be countered by Ron's mech. One shoulder panel opened, and 8 small missile tubes fired with a rapid bew-bew-bew. The missiles were thumb-thick, a dozen centimeters long, and glowed with intense magical light. The flares floated and filled the area with a shadowless illumination, no shadows anywhere. Jerry poked his head out and exclaimed, baffled, "What the hell is this? Breaking stealth I get, but removing shadows? Isn't there always a shadow where there's light?" Ron replied triumphantly from inside the mech. "These are shadowless stealth-breaking illumination flares, new from George and Fred. Transformations, disillusionment charms, invisibility cloaks, shadow stealth. None of that works anymore." Jerry ground his teeth. Since Ted had opened the game's research and development system, players had started climbing a technological tree of their own making. Class balance was a joke now. Whoever invented something more useful imposed themselves. A player's arms race had begun. Tools like the flares would boost non-stealth classes, forcing stealth players to develop phase shifting and other advanced tricks to stay hidden. The magic world had once been blamed for promoting marriages and births. Now it was driving combat innovation. Ron also demoed other devices: frost spray, an area-freezing gas that stuck to the ground and slowed melee fighters, a 360-degree all-domain shrinking ray that momentarily shrank hordes of monsters to ease damage, and the light of stupidity, an optical lure that sapped mental acuity and dulled spellcasters who stared at it. After they tried the gear, Ron asked Ted, "What do you think?" Ted nodded. "Good. You could add sound wave attacks, too. What if someone fights you with their eyes closed using other senses?" "Good point," Ron said, thoughtful. Ted stopped Jerry from leaving. Hermione's look was lethal. Ted asked cautiously, "What's Ron been up to lately?" Jerry shrugged. "Not much. He was preparing for the arena tournament. Then the last few days he's been resting, fighting monsters and doing quests." I remember he broke up with Lavender about half a year ago. Has he started seeing someone? Jerry smiled a sly, mischievous grin. He's been chatting happily with somebody recently. It's in-game, so I don't know who, but it's definitely someone of the opposite sex. He wouldn't bother to impress a guy. Ted breathed a private sigh of relief. He didn't want Ron falling back into the stifling old mold of a proper British gentleman. Jerry was ready to leave. Hermione's gaze was shifting, but he paused to ask about Easter plans. Ted said, "I'm busy tomorrow. Important business." Easter was a festival, a day of potent magic, an opportune moment. The Icelandic subterranean surge would be the geographical advantage, and hundreds of thousands of players could be the human element. He still had to push a game update that night. If he reset everyone's level and blamed a server rollback, players would riot. Too cruel. He'd offer a choice, voluntarily reset to gain new chances, and let him siphon the freed experience. Reincarnation, heard of it? The update pitched. One reincarnation granted extra lives and some retained enhancements. Equipment, inventory, faction relationships, and more could be kept. All those players who had spent months courting NPC favors, now they could keep their items and relationships and gain a safety net. Nearly 50,000 players opted to reincarnate, the first wave all max level. Ted grinned. The people had arrived. At midnight in Iceland, the island was silent. Since the earthquakes and fissures 2 days earlier, many had evacuated. Iceland, the westernmost reach of Europe, sits close to the Arctic Circle. About an eighth of it is perpetually ice, but the rest is habitable thanks to the Atlantic current and volcanic warmth. That lava had become lethal. In some places, the ground split half a meter wide and tens of kilometers long. Fissures spewed white steam. One side of the crack uplifted, the other sank, like some colossal underground creature was about to roll over. Yesterday, there had been over 1,400 tremors. Most people had fled. The airport was closed. Ted looked down and saw only a smattering of lights in the southeast. The rest of the island was dark. Perfect. No one to bother him. Ted flicked his cloak and flew toward a dark volcanic silhouette. The magic node readings showed he was close to the geoscape magic net, but the node wasn't on the surface. He'd have to go underground. He landed in a crater that had fractured. Thick smoke billowed and a red glow came from beneath. He cast a full-body protection spell. The smoke was poisonous, the heat intense. He descended into the crater and found a wide fissure he could easily step through. He followed the subterranean crack. Temperatures stayed high, with pools of lava and solidified magma. He could leave whenever he wanted. He was a wizard, but he pressed on. After 20 minutes, the slope turned into a steep shaft, and the air cooled, showing he'd moved far from the volcano. He switched to flight and dropped vertically. After 5 or 6 minutes of slow falling, he estimated he'd gone over 10 kilometers down. Then the air felt humid. He peered into the rock and found soil between the crevices. After another 10 minutes, he came upon water. And by the water, to his astonishment, moss and ferns half his height with thick rubbery leaves. Giant snails the size of bicycles munched away. Underground life. He joked to himself about asking the house elves for escargot and pushed on. The underground space opened into something spectacular. It had its own dim light source, millions of bioluminescent fungi in the cavern ceiling. There were trees over 10 meters tall, massive mushrooms 2 or 3 stories high, ferns, strange flowers, and fauna, mammals and birds with faint blue glows. A tiny luminescent bird landed on his hand. Small creatures instinctively trusted him. He brushed aside a man-eating flower and warned himself that the underground world was not without danger. Then he found a bone behind a patch of leaves, thicker than his waist. Ascending to hover, he saw the rest of the skeleton, a white forearm and a ribcage the size of a house. The whole being must have been 20 to 30 meters tall, but the skull was wrong, more like a giant humanoid ape than a human giant. He pressed deeper and ran into a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Ted used his psychic power to seize and slam it aside. Beyond that lay an underground sea, an endless expanse of water. He flew to a rock shelf 100 meters above the surface and looked out over water as far as the eye could see. He then detected an abnormal magnetic field. Stones hovered in midair. His magic meter hummed. Magical activity here was strong and natural, not the signature of some great predatory beast. He swam down through the floating stones as if through water. After passing the 2-kilometer magnetic anomaly, he began to fall. The temperature rose and the rock warmed under his touch. He had reached another subterranean layer. The magic meter beeper started to sing. He had found the geoscape network vein. He just needed to follow it to the node. Down in a flowing sea of molten red lava, a massive obsidian outcrop stood like an island. On the obsidian platform, an alchemy array had been laid out, a magic circle inlaid with electrum mixed with mithril powder and studded with gems. At the center was a square, then an equilateral triangle, then a vertical line, an anvil at its core. Ted produced his magic hammer. The hammer itself had cost him at least 2,000 galleons in alchemical materials. He pulled out metal components, a red metal fragment that looked like a machine remnant, and a thin strip with blue and white stripes he suspected were pieces from some otherworld battlefield, fragments that felt like the remains of an Iron Man suit and a battered vibranium shield. He checked the time and the planetary alignment. The array activated. The metals liquefied and coalesced into incandescent, drifting molten metal. The circle's lines flared, operating at full power and refining the ingredients, burning away impurities until a tiny fingernail-sized lump remained. Finally, a metal ring formed. Ted placed it on the anvil and began to hammer, blow after blow. The surrounding lava vibrated, rippling like water. With each strike, he funneled huge amounts of magic world experience into the ring. He hammered until sweat beaded, and a faint, ethereal influence began to radiate from the metal, a rippling presence. Above ground, Iceland trembled in rhythmic waves. New fissures opened, and white steam poured out as the land seemed to tear apart. At the final moment, Ted placed a grain-sized gem onto the ring, the psychic gem he'd created by accumulating months' worth of psychic power in the ideal land. The instant the gem touched the band, a pulse of blended psychic and magical energy surged outward. Iceland shuddered and then grew calm. The volcano quieted, fissures sealed, and the earthquakes stopped. Silence settled. In his hand lay an unassuming ring, a silver-white band set with a white crystal. Inside the band, a phrase was engraved, mind over matter. The One Ring, Harry Potter World Subring, Ring of Mind Domination, was born. The birth of the magic ring, give me your monthly passes. 416. Umbridge in action. Easter dinner in the Great Hall was in full swing when Ted pushed the doors open and walked in. The feast had been going for hours, and the hall buzzed with laughter. He found his friends and took a seat. Hermione saw him, and her face lit up with surprised pleasure. "Didn't you say you had something to do? How did you get back so quickly?" she asked. "Everything went smoothly. No trouble, it's already done," Ted said with a smile. He had expected complications. Big jobs always seemed to have them. But somehow this one had gone off without a hitch. Maybe being deep underground, out of sight, had helped. He was starving. He'd been working with a hammer for 6 hours straight and had been at it since midnight. By evening, he hadn't eaten all day. Hermione, who knew him well, noticed a simple ring on his finger. She studied it with a strange, distracted look, as if something about it pulled at her. Ted noticed her staring, leaned over, caught her by the head, and kissed her fiercely. Hermione blinked, flushed, glanced at the others in the hall as if embarrassed, then pretended not to mind and went back to her plate. Everyone knew about Ted and Hermione, but this public display was a first. Harry, quick to match the showmanship, grabbed Malfoy and smeared his face with cream. Malfoy, mid-bite of steak, looked confused and wiped his cheek. On the other side of the table, Neville turned nervously, and sure enough, Ginny was already leaning in. "Don't, she protested too late. Jerry could only look on, heart squeezed tight. He couldn't eat, it felt like being force-fed. When he turned to commiserate with his friend, the friend was busy holding a two-way mirror, wearing a sly grin, whispering about a weekend meet in Hogsmeade. Jerry sighed and thought of Sherry. "I miss you," he thought. "I miss you so much." The Easter holiday lasted a few days, and when it ended, the school scheduled career counseling sessions for fifth years. The sessions were mostly formalities, a brief chat and a signature to prove you'd attended. In practice, the ministry expected students to sign paperwork at graduation proving they had found employment. Whether anyone actually had was another matter. With the world changing the way it had, interdimensional incursions, monster invasions, shifting magic systems and volatile markets. Steady jobs at the ministry looked safer than ever. Galleons could crash, magic could mutate. Having an iron rice bowl at the ministry could be the only reliable future. Hermione had planned to join the ministry once, but after Ted had explained how things really worked there, networks, favors, the way influence mattered, she'd cooled. She wanted to change the magic world from the grassroots up to do good work for ordinary witches and wizards. Finding out that some of the ministry's rot came from the very people she'd been taught to trust left her confused. Young idealists like Hermione were shaken. Ron, however, was not. Ministry jobs, Great Britain, politics, none of it mattered to him. He just wanted a small, steady life. He signed his counseling form quickly and left. Jerry handled a different kind of meeting. The counselor, all smiles and tired platitudes, suggested he might rent out his house if he couldn't find work, then take a job delivering parcels, get married, have kids, maybe borrow galleons from Gringotts for a mortgage. The barrage of helpful life advice nearly made Jerry's head explode. If he took that path, would his life be something he wanted? No. He came out of the office reeling until Ron, tightening bolts in the secret base, sneered, "Told you, don't listen to their nonsense." Ron was elbow deep in the first machine, applying lubricant and tweaking screws with a magic wrench. The half-magical, half-mechanical contraption was his life's work. He paid no mind to official pronouncements. He only listened to the machine. He put on a metal mask that looked like a welding helmet, switched on a magic stereo, and started to work to a throbbing rhythm. Gears turning, pistons clanking, sparks hissing. He twirled a wrench and waved a welding gun like a conductor. Jerry watched, bewildered. Ron muttered through the mask, "Don't bother me. I'm appeasing the machine spirit." When Ron had filled out his career counseling form that morning, he'd written, "Magic Mech Operator," and under special skill, "Special Vehicle Driving, Old Driver." Watching him fuss over the machine with obvious affection, Jerry remembered how often Ron called the thing "my big beauty." After Ron finished his ritual, the machine purred differently, as if it had been soothed. Jerry wasn't sure whether to be amused or impressed. In the greenhouse, Neville was testing a new strain of Dittany, Super Dittany, designed to speed recovery from all manner of injuries. He'd developed the cultivation plan in the game, run dozens of virtual trials that had involved multiple character deaths, and finally succeeded in translating the process to the real world after 3 failed attempts. Neville, usually reserved, bounced around the small, half-grown plants like a man who'd just discovered a new world. Ginny was there beside him, quietly devoted, helping with soil and fertilizers, braving tedious experiments with the kind of shyness-piercing enthusiasm that made people call her relentless. Even Ron joked that Ginny pursued Neville like a hound after a rabbit, intense enough to frighten the rabbit into submission. Neville enjoyed the attention. He was just awkward about it in public. Jerry had been training too. He'd made a name for himself as a magic assassin. His childhood sweetheart Sherry had even started before him, joining Lupin's incident handling team, taking on magical anomalies and alien monsters across Britain. She was outstanding in the field. Ted had given her a razor-sharp magic dagger that proved effective against strange beasts. Back at school, Sherry had become something of a legend, charismatic, larger than life, beloved by classmates. Malfoy, whose father had recently died under murky circumstances, had grown steadier. He'd straightened his hair, worn suits, and taken over family business responsibilities with surprising competence. Even Sirius had stopped harassing his nephew and pitched in. The game everyone used, Ideal Land, had launched a reincarnation feature, and many max-level players had decided to restart, driving a fresh surge of activity. Parker, meanwhile, was developing a homestead system, manors that players could buy, upgrade, and live in. It was a game mechanic designed with a wink. Everyone could own a 5-star manor for a price. Materials, labor, blueprints, and the land itself would all cost in-game currency. If you couldn't pay, the mall offered loans. Low interest, equal principal payments, take your pick. The plan was a classic economy sink. Give players something to spend on so their hoard currency wouldn't wreck the game's balance. "It's despicable," Ted told Parker when he saw the plan. "Only you could invent something that blatant. I like it. Let's do it." "Thank you, Master," Parker replied, pleased. "I'll keep at it." Late in April, Umbridge received a summons from Minister Fudge to meet at the ministry. Even Fudge, who disliked many of the new developments, couldn't avoid using Ideal Land. Everyone was there. Owlpost had become rare and unreliable. Some newspapers and magazines were even considering launching in the virtual space to save on printing and delivery. The prospect of owls out of work made for awkward optics. The ministry had quietly decided not to publish the owl unemployment figures. Umbridge had come to Hogwarts with ambitions, but reality had been stingier than she'd expected. Sent as the ministry's emissary, she had tried to build prestige, but found herself stymied at every turn. She'd attempted to undermine McGonagall, to position herself as a replacement, but McGonagall's decades of service and affection from students left Umbridge outmaneuvered. Her overblown punishments and officious decrees earned little loyalty. Filch was the only definite ally, and even some Slytherin pupils who'd once sided with the ministry were drifting away. Peeves had been a particular thorn. The pressure wore on her, sleepless nights, a dependence on a dreamless sleep potion, and a face grown haggard with bags under her eyes. Fudge's message left her alarmed. He expected results, and she had none to show. Ted, who watched the ministry's lines of communication through Ideal Land, knew Umbridge was headed to the minister's office. In the ministry, Fudge listened without surprise. "Umbridge," he said, "I know your record so far hasn't been stellar. I'm prepared to overlook it, but I have a task for you that must be completed." When Umbridge returned from the Ministry of Magic, she looked utterly consumed. Stress had carved her face into something almost serpentine. She wasn't one to hide her feelings, but under the pressure, she scarcely held herself together. Still, the task Fudge had handed her was one she couldn't refuse, and it fit her ambitions perfectly. The problem was it was ridiculously difficult. Fudge wanted her to be headmistress. Umbridge was ruthless and loquacious, but she knew her limits. What sort of wizard was Dumbledore? What sort of wizard was she? How could she possibly unseat him and take his place? Only if Dumbledore died. Fudge had said he would help and told her to go back and prepare. How could he help? Could he really arrange Dumbledore's death? Umbridge felt a wave of despair. They conspired loudly in a soundproofed office, thinking no one could possibly eavesdrop. In reality, by then most of the ministry was under Fudge's sway. There were no serious rivals left. When the tiger is away, the monkeys play. He wasn't afraid of anyone overhearing. What they didn't expect was that Ted found out. How did he hear what was said in a soundproof chamber, someone might ask? Because the private messages they used in Ideal Land were monitored by Parker. He hadn't dared forget the tasks his master assigned. After discovering their chat, he kept an eye on the matter. Fudge had used magic to seal sound in and out of the room, but his two-way mirror sat in his desk drawer. Strictly speaking, the mirror was part of the Ideal Land hardware, but of course it could be used for other things. Parker called it the Two-Way Prism Project. A magic net company that insisted it didn't collect user data would, of course, keep an ear out for keywords. Parker recorded the conversation and informed Ted. Listening, Ted could hardly believe it. Was Fudge mad? Did he really need to go so far to install Umbridge as headmistress, or was he planning something worse? Ted contacted Barty, his mole inside the ministry. Barty, now fitted with a human alchemy, biomechanical magical body, had risen to a mid-upper level post. He hadn't advanced as fast as Umbridge, but his abilities and positions gave him access to a lot of information. "Has Fudge made any unusual moves?" Ted asked. Barty thought a moment. "He's been spending much more time in his office for the past half-month. He's been poring over old records, decades, even centuries old. Many concern the last Goblin Rebellion." "I see. Keep a close watch. Find out what he's up to." "Understood." Ted didn't bother telling Barty to be extra cautious. With Barty's strength and that alchemical body, he could probably walk into and out of the ministry 7 times over. The ministry had more moral authority than real power. It had often been easily overtaken in the past. Dumbledore had long ignored internal ministry politics, because to wizards, magic mattered most. Fudge was at best a level 12 wizard. The Auror Force, the ministry's strongest combat arm, was practically controlled by the Order of the Phoenix. What could he really do? Ted planned to wait and watch. Then Lucius Malfoy sent word. The old man had faked his death and been hiding in the shadows of the magic world. He kept tabs on both Voldemort and the wider game. Though he'd removed himself from the chessboard, he had not stopped being a piece. Lucius and Ted met in the Forbidden Forest. "You should warn Dumbledore," Lucius said. "Fudge's behavior has been odd." "Explain." "He's been coming and going from some strange places. He's been contacting someone in secret." Ted's first irrelevant thought was that perhaps Fudge had taken to gambling or other vices. He was a lonely man in his 50s. But then he thought of Umbridge and Barty's discovery. This smelled like trouble. "Any leads?" Lucius hesitated. "I can't be certain, but I think it's tied to Gringotts. The person Fudge is contacting seems to be at Gringotts." Goblins, then. Ted decided to keep an eye on Fudge, but a new notification arrived from the system. Ding. Talent. Otherworld knowledge. Triggered. Discovered poneglyph. Poneglyph, a stone tablet from the New World recording a century of blank history, the truth of history, and containing detailed information and blueprints for 3 ancient weapons. Requires 111 experience points to exchange. In Ted's head, a large stone appeared. The front was blank. The back held 3 immense, intricate blueprints. They were labeled Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus. Pluton was an enormous battleship, an otherworld aircraft carrier. Poseidon looked like a colossal, tens of meters tall mer creature. It couldn't be built so much as cultivated. Uranus resembled a floating sky city. The raw materials list alone could fill a dictionary. All dazzling, all impractical. Ted set them aside. He turned back to the poneglyph's promised truth. The slab's face seemed blank, but his mind power began to scan it. The stone was unbelievably hard, made of 26 enormous stones fitted together with no weathering. Faint scratches ran across the surface in a special pattern. Ted leaned in, studying from every angle. At a 5-degree tilt, the scratches resolved into a single sentence. "Eat people." A history of eating people, he thought. History has always eaten people. He laughed. He'd lived 2 lives and seen it, the same ruthless truth. Whether magic, ideology, or system, history devours people. Knowing that made him feel oddly cleansed. The otherworld knowledge had also pushed his mind power forward. The ancient weapon blueprints were tempting, but building them would be obscene in cost and effort. If he wanted mass destruction, there were easier means. Poseidon's charm to command sea creatures was amusing. After all, he already had a merperson princess, but Uranus was beyond any realistic reach. Before he had much more time to consider Fudge, Fleur sent an urgent plea for help. The French Ministry of Magic had intervened too. Something in their territory had escalated. In Ile-de-France, the old royal grounds of Fontainebleau lay bathed in spring. The forest, oaks, holm oaks, birches, stretched like a vast green carpet. But an anomaly had appeared. These days, anomalies were not unknown. France had an Anomaly Incident Handling Bureau to deal with magical incidents and creatures. Britain had a similar outfit, reportedly under the Military Intelligence Bureau as Department 18. When Ted and the others arrived, a line of French agents in bulletproof vests and combat boots guarded the perimeter. They looked able, but clearly outmatched. 2 injured men were being loaded into an ambulance as Neville, Ron, Hermione, and Fleur stepped up. Neville's compassion flared. "May I take a look?" he asked. The medical staff and a tall, trench-coated officer eyed the group. The officer, deputy director of the French Anomaly Bureau, was accustomed to dealing with wizards, but still watched them closely. Fleur nodded. Neville unwrapped a bandage, revealing an arm where muscle had been smashed, not sliced, like it had been crushed by a mace. Bruising told of blunt trauma. Neville produced a vial of his refined super-white essence and poured a few drops on the wound. The blood washed away and bleeding halted. He hovered his hand, and gentle golden restorative magic surfaced. In a flash, the arm was whole. If not for a few faint stains, the injury had never existed. The nurse and the trench-coated officer were stunned. He had seen potions and charms before, but nothing that mended something that should have taken months to heal in seconds. "What potion was that? Do you sell it?" the officer blurted. Neville started to explain, but Ted waved the questions off. "It's not something you can simply buy," he said. Ted asked Fleur what they were facing. Hermione watched hard. Fleur had grown into her beauty, 18 and radiant, and Hermione could barely conceal her envy. "The attackers are goblins," Fleur said. But reconnaissance shows other things in that mutated forest. Goblins alone wouldn't prompt this? Hermione asked. Goblins had long been treated as monsters rather than a recognized magical people. They were intelligent enough to have a language, but primitive, brutal, and treacherous. There had even been a case where a goblin adopted by a wizard couple learned quickly, at first so much that its owners boasted about civilizing it. 10 months after, the goblin murdered the husband with a stick and shattered the wife's wand. A dozen ministry enforcers tracked and finally killed it, but the event exposed the danger. The woman survived but was found pregnant by a goblin. Later examinations suggested goblins didn't have distinct females. Their reproductive methods were alien. After that, goblins were classified as monsters. Killing them was legal. Goblins reproduced fast and favored ambush tactics. Left on their own, small numbers wouldn't show themselves. They attacked en masse and were dangerous in swarms. Ted had deliberately incorporated many otherworld monsters and races into the magic world to make wizards more prepared. Some players had demanded goblins be modeled on their more depraved real-world stereotypes. Others were outraged. In any case, goblins in the system had low average stats, around a 4, and were generally a fifth as dangerous as a human in combat. One adult with a polearm could handle 2 or 3 goblins with calm. If it were only goblins, Fleur said, France could have sent a wizard and a squad of special forces and handled them. But these goblins are different. They're stronger, more violent, better organized, and they have special abilities. And we've detected creatures similar to minotaurs in the forest. Cast your monthly vote. Kill goblins. Ford 18. Grand Forest Fall. Ricano's Infinite Dream. The Grand Forest is home to countless goblins. They are the dominant population, not the strongest creatures in the woods, but the most numerous, and therefore the primary cannon fodder. No one can say when it started, but a strange power began to spread through the forest. At first it went unnoticed, then slowly every monster in the wood began to change. They grew stronger, and at the same time, more irritable. Not long after, humans began to appear here with unexpected frequency. Sword fighters, gunners, wand-wielding mages, and even the unarmed. The goblins favored the last 2 types, especially because the magic users and the unarmed tended to include a lot of women. That made them mouthwater. But human women were rarely easy prey. Anyone bold enough to come into the Grand Forest usually had tricks up their sleeves. The goblins suffered heavy losses, though they reproduced quickly, and thanks to the mysterious power, their bodies had grown far stronger than before. Without those changes, they would have been wiped out. Muscle growth was obvious. Many goblins could now arm wrestle full-grown human men. Some whose arms bulked up further evolved into thrower goblins, hauling baskets of stones to smash intruders. Those with far greater strength became centurions, massive, disciplined fighters who cut down anyone who disobeyed. A few even learned magic, simple ice or fire spells. The mage goblins were rare and revered as elders. One goblin even rose to lordship, Raging Thunder Canon. Lightning is a powerful force that even human wizards struggle to master, and Canon had not only pushed his body to the goblin extremes, but had learned to wield lightning within the Grand Forest. He boasted that he would unite the goblins, dominate the world, and seize every female he could find. It took him only months to unite tens of thousands of goblins in the forest. Pride swelled in him until he discovered rivals. A clan of cat demons had produced a poison cat king, quick as a ghost and lethal to the touch. Among the Taurines, a titan named Sada had risen, 3.5 meters tall and weighing several tons. Even Canon, already tall for a goblin at 1.5 meters, looked tiny beside that living beef of a warlord. Worst of all, 2 human women with formidable wizardry had settled in the deep forest. When Canon first heard about them, he could barely sleep for excitement. When he went to fetch the bride, he nearly perished in a ruin. Those 2 witches were not simple. After that debacle, Canon's grand dreams of a goblin dynasty faded. Still, within the Grand Forest, he remained the Goblin King. Then the world itself seemed to break. One day the sky trembled, the ground split, the heavens cracked open, flames fell like rain, and stars rained down. Space contorted. Canon thought the end had come. After some unknowable time, the chaos settled, but the forest was different. Trees he'd never seen before sprang up. Tens of thousands of his goblin followers were reduced to less than 3,000. Scouts who ventured beyond the woods reported strange humans outside, and surprisingly, weak ones. If it hadn't been for their gunmen holding the line, the goblin numbers could have swelled again fast. Humans began to encroach on the forest. The first patrols were small, inexperienced, and easily slaughtered. The survivors retreated and fortified the forest's edge with heavy guns. If a centurion stuck his head out, he would be blasted apart. For 3 days, both sides held a stalemate, until a larger party entered, young human mages, a mix of men and women. Kaino perked up. Humans! A party of young humans. What happened to them? He thought. Raging thunder, Kaino's skin was iron-hued and thick. Small-caliber pistol shots bounced off. But something gnawed at him. He felt like he'd forgotten lots of things. As he laid his scimitar beside him and tried to think, a goblin sentry shouted from outside the grass hut. Humans are coming. A group of young humans. There are women. Kaino leaped to his feet and snatched up his scimitar. Let me lead the charge, he roared. He charged, old instincts and lust driving him. But what he saw stopped him cold. The new human party were real mages, cutting through his subjects with terrifying ease. Kaino swung his blade and called lightning from the sky, only to have it casually caught by the leading human. Electric light danced and crackled in that man's hand, and instead of being rattled, the man smiled with pleasant curiosity. Oh, lightning magic. Interesting. I must study you. Perhaps I'll learn something. Kaino realized too late the one confronting him was a true magic prodigy. He watched this human casually slaughter goblins and shrug off his lightning. Provoked, the human forced Kaino to push himself, to draw out forbidden techniques, chain lightning, magnetic thunderspheres, lightning arrows, everything Kaino could muster. Under that pressure, he reached out and unleashed nearly all his power, but it still wasn't enough. The human only said, "That's all for now. Continue." And in the next instant, an ice spear the thickness of a thigh drove through Kaino's chest. Kaino jerked awake in his grass hut, confused, his scimitar at his side. It had been a long time since he'd seen a female. Wait, had he forgotten something? He scratched his head. The sentry's shout came again. Humans are coming! A group of young humans, attractive. Kaino sprang up again, sword gripped, heart pounding. Let me lead. No, this feels familiar. He stopped mid-charge. When he saw the young mages, his certainty hardened. This was déjà vu. When his lightning was shrugged off again, he remembered. This had happened before. It's a dream, a fake, he snarled. Kaino punched himself in the face, and the blow burst into a spark of electric light. The explosion threw him backward and smoked his face black, but it cleared his head. The bodies of slain goblins around him vanished. They'd never existed. So you're an illusionist? Die, he bellowed. 5 minutes later, a voice, Ted's voice, said, This is about as far as we'll push him for now. Move on. Flames erupting from the ground turned Kaino into an inferno, and he went up in screaming fire. He woke gasping, staring at his twin blades. Who am I? Where am I? What am I supposed to do? His mind was a jumble. He scratched himself in the groin and muttered, I need to find a female, an honest goblin admission of his priorities. The sentry shouted once more. Kaino leaped up again. Let me. His grip tightened on the scimitar. No, dream. Is this still a dream? He looked at his reflection in the blade. His iron-colored skin was real enough. 3 minutes later, Ted used a mind stab, and Kaino's eyes bulged, blood pouring from his 7 orifices as he died. Kaino woke again. It's fake. It's all fake, he laughed, slitting his own throat with his scimitar. Blood sprayed, and he felt exhilarated. Then the dream dissolved, and he woke up anew. This time he reversed the grip and plunged the blade into his heart. He woke again, then summoned a bolt of lightning and struck himself dead. Ted had already squeezed him dry a dozen times. He understood Kaino's limits. The goblin was pushing himself to the absolute maximum with each loop. He was genuinely trying to die. Ted shook his head. There were only so many ways to force out more. 17 repetitions had passed, all variations on the same theme. Kaino's intelligence was middling and his will fragile. If he had been smarter, he might have seen through the illusion. If his resolve had been stronger, he could have endured more. Either way, the dream finally unraveled. The souls and bodies of Kaino and the other goblins slipped into Ted's ideal land instance, ready to be harvested. Ted planned to add a new scenario, materials and values already in hand. The goblins' minds were simple, milky white brains filled with lust and a single meaning of life: go into the forest and find females. Ted wondered at Syria being rescued from a place like this. Though hours had felt spent inside the dream, only a little over a minute had passed in reality. When the team opened their portable domain, the crude goblin shacks and corpses vanished and the loot cards auto-collected. Fleur exhaled with relief. I should have invited you sooner. You make it look easy. 3,000 enhanced goblins had been cleared. The forest's terrain made large-scale bombardment impractical. Ted's team couldn't just torch the place without collateral, but they were experienced. Neville charged and personally killed 80 goblins with brutal efficiency. Hermione's broad area magic was perfect for taking out scattered, small targets. Ron donned his knight armor, transformed, and chased goblins with a crazed laugh that terrified them. Goblin culture, used to pursuing female creatures, had never seen such overtly enthusiastic males. Ted himself used his mind power to minimize bloodshed. Goblins within 100 meters of him simply fell asleep. Young minds do fall easy and sleep well. He put them down forever and opened his ideal land, scooping up their souls and bodies to save on logistics. Only Raging Thunder Kano had warranted extended attention. A level 15 Lord-class monster with special lightning mutation and physical enhancements, his attributes and skills were formidable by goblin standards. For Ted, there were only two categories: stronger than him or cannon fodder. Kano was still cannon fodder, particularly because his mind had no real protection. He was fragile, a slaughter. Ted had lingered only because he wanted to see whether he could force out any new lightning techniques. But the mission wasn't over. Recon drones Ted had sent ahead showed the forest stretched far deeper and was full of threats. To the east lived a clan of long-clawed, furred leapers, the goblins called cat demons, agile, dangerous, and their territory filled with a pale purple poisonous miasma and treacherous bogs. To the west roamed the taurines, bipedal bovines wielding crude axes, some 2 meters tall, others swollen to 3 meters with bulging muscles and twisted horns. The leader in that area had a bright red mane, totems painted on his body, metal decorations on his horns, and left deep prints with every step. These taurines seemed the strongest, guarding the richest berry bushes. South of Ted's position, a fork split the forest. To the left, a woman in tattered blue clothes sat muttering to herself, her magic barely contained. The trees and ground around her were frozen. To the right, a similarly disheveled woman in red radiated heat and scorched the land. Her area was a charred ring. No wonder some goblins had picked up simple ice or fire magic. They'd been infected by the magic bleeding from these two. Ted considered capturing them alive and attempting to heal their minds. As a mind mage, he wondered if he could cure insanity. It would be a chance to try, and he wanted to reach them before Hermione stumbled on them. There was one more odd reading. A patch in the north showed weird spatial fluctuations, as if a rift hid something. The Grand Forest was a shallow pond full of big fish, and everywhere Ted looked, there were big bosses. The process of capturing the Wizard Sisters had been almost absurdly simple. Ted had wrapped the whole area in a mirrored dream, his mirror space, and while the officials on the ground were still organizing, he worked inside the dream. He seized the two loony female wizards alive, sealed their minds and their magic, and put them under lock and key. He'd deal with them later. By the time Ted and his companions finished clearing the goblins, it was already afternoon. After a quick meal of magically prepared food, they decided to try their luck in the cat demon territory. Reality wasn't a game. Those cat demons, more like long-clawed, monkeyish creatures, didn't sit around waiting to be killed. They were sly, hiding in undergrowth or treetops, watching for chances to ambush. Ted's captures were precise, but when one of their companions fell, these beasts often broke off and fled instead of fighting to the death like a scripted monster. The whole forest had a rotten feel to it, soaked through with a faint purple haze. As the sun went down, the mist thickened, poisonous and clingy. They wore safety helmet charms to filter the gas, but it still made everything awkward. "Let's stop for today," Fleur suggested. "We can't rush. It's easy to fall into danger." If they finished everything too fast, they'd waste this rare opportunity. Everyone agreed. Killing 3,000 goblins by morning had taken its toll. The anomaly was large. There was no need to rush off and miss classes at Hogwarts tomorrow. They flew out of the forest on bamboo dragonflies. On landing, the director of the French Abnormality Bureau hurried up to them. Was everything smooth? How many enemies were inside? Fleur told him. When he heard 3,000, the director nearly shrieked. 3,000 enhanced goblins was a lot. Even when Ted told him they'd been wiped out, he couldn't quite believe it. Ted caught his incredulous expression in a glance. With a flick of his hand, a row of goblin corpses appeared on the ground. Common goblins, goblin throwers, centurions, and even an ice-fire goblin, one of each type. "I thought you might want these," Ted said. He left them to be taken back for research. For the purely Muggle officials, the existence of unregulated people who used real magic and lived unnaturally long lives stirred envy, greed, and desperate hope. Private labs were springing up across Europe. The idea of creating magic by artificial means obsessed certain wealthy, terminally ill patrons. Ted could think of ways to do it, if only he had test subjects, but large-scale transference of magic into Muggles was, and probably would remain, impossible. Even a single successful target would cost more blood and resources than it was worth. Still, for the super-rich, what most people considered exorbitant could be nothing. Lives, ecosystems, even governments, these were acceptable expenses to ruthless ambition. While Ted and his team were fighting monsters in France, Death Eaters in Eastern Europe were already collaborating with some Muggle elites. Voldemort and his followers despised Muggles, but desperation and strategic shelter had forced them to cooperate. Cold-blooded opportunists are never in short supply. For the ambitious, sacrificing others to secure power was simply business. That night, Ted's group stayed in a small-town hotel. Fleur, as host, stayed with them. They ate a proper French meal. While Hermione slipped off to the restroom, Fleur asked, quiet and casual, "You didn't bring her here on purpose, did you?" Ted fumbled. If he denied it, it sounded like Hermione had been forced. If he admitted it, it revealed more than he liked. Fleur was patient. She didn't press. Over the evening, she kept being kind to Hermione, showing her French cosmetics and swapping small gifts. The two girls clicked, chattering like sisters. Ron noticed and fell quiet, hiding with a basket of snacks and muttering into his first machine as usual. Ted, Neville, and Ron gravitated to each other and talked about boy stuff while a French film played on television. The three of them shared beers and snacks and watched an R-rated Sophie Marceau movie. Ted checked the loot he'd collected during the day. Now that his pickups were automatic, card drops felt less exciting. But the Grand Forest had still been generous. Dozens of cards, mostly low-level. Equipment cards included Flame Nanmu Staff. Staff grants 2 fire spells. Physical attacks also add magic damage. Wind Chasing Staff. Staff, 2 wind spells, grants a brief levitation ability. Shadow Touch. Necklace, +2 agility, allows control of one's own shadow, suitable for Jerry. Engineering Blueprint Colt Fire Snake, magic-guided firearm blueprint, handed to Ron to study, maybe to adapt to his first machine. Fire Demon Arm Guard, +2 Constitution, gives a defensive fire shield, Neville's. Bulletproof Vest, chest armor, +10 physical defense, resists long-range physical attacks and automatically defends against sneak attacks and hidden arrows, given to Ron to protect him when he's not piloting his first machine. Goblin Netherbone Pendant, necklace, +2 spirit, summons 5 goblin specters to fight for the wearer. Vaughn's Wind Coat, trench coat, +2 intelligence, +2 spirit, +20 movement speed, 30 jump ability. Bulletproof, reduces bullet damage by 15%. Slow fall, reduces most fall damage. Note, what you don't obtain in youth will be a lifelong regret. The red Vaughn's Windcoat was the only red card that dropped that day. It was magnificent, off-white with orange-red flame edges. When worn, it rippled like wind and fire around the body. Ted couldn't believe it. He'd never gotten anything like this in the game. It added 4 attribute points, increased speed and jump ability. Slow fall he could ignore, but bulletproof raised awkward questions. Did it stop pistol rounds? Armor-piercing sniper slugs? Cannon shells? He might have to test it on himself, which was not an appealing thought. There were also several summon cards, mostly goblins, useless as summons, so Ted turned them into dog food to enhance other cards. In the morning, his summons had performed well and deserved strengthening. Small consumable cards dropped too: Wild Strawberry Green, Rainy Flower Leaf Green, and peculiarly, a Coin of Destiny that had a 50-50 effect. Half the time you were electrocuted, half the time you were healed and had your magic restored. Ron tried too. Both zapped him, his hair smoked. He decided to save the rest for Jerry and his twins. Neville admired his new black arm guard patterned with flames, polished it with a towel and sighed. Treat equipment like a lover. Ron, clutching his shrunken first machine, nodded like he understood perfectly. Hermione and Fleur on the other side rolled their eyes at the boys' solemnity. The next day, they returned to clear the cat demons. A few hundred of the little ambushers lurked in the gas-soaked forest, and because they loved hit-and-run tactics, the fight was as troublesome as the goblins had been. When they finally faced the Poison Cat King, it was several times larger than a normal cat demon, at least a head taller than a person, black and purple, and radiating oppressive magic. Unlike his subordinates, he was mindless and furious. There was no chance of a chase. The ground itself was swampy and poisonous, so the battlefield was awkward. Ted let Neville, Ron, Hermione, and Fleur take the lead. They fought for more than 10 minutes before finally bringing the Poison Cat King down. Ted had hardly needed to intervene, so the battle took them longer than the goblins had. The sun was setting by the time they limped back to the inn. Fleur and Hermione had grown extraordinarily close, practically sisters. They nearly insisted on the same room that night. Hermione declared she would only share with Ted to make a point, and Fleur indulged her. The three boys shared another quiet, boyish evening. On the third day, they began to clear the taurines. These were worse. Each taurine stood over 2 meters tall, bulging with muscle, horned and thick-skinned, with innate level 2 magic resistance. The Anomaly Bureau's pistols barely made a scratch. Without heavy machine guns, sniper rifles, or grenade launchers, they were difficult to kill. Taurines were aggressive and impulsive. An axe swing could split a tree, and in a frenzy, they'd lower their heads and charge with their horns. They couldn't cast spells, but their bodies often manifested a special protective layer that made magic less effective. Wizards called it the Overlord state. Neville and the others lured and eliminated them one by one. If too many were drawn, Ted would step in and trap a few mines, making them swing uselessly in place. After half a day of this, the group was exhausted and still hadn't found the boss. They went back to rest. On the 5th day, they finally confronted the Taurine King, Sorta. He must have been 3.5 meters tall, not counting his horns, his muscles bulging as if about to burst. A heavy mane of blood-red hair framed his black head. White totem patterns marked his fur, and copper rings hung from his horns. He carried an axe larger than Ron's torso and weighed several tons. Each step from his basin-sized hooves left deep impressions in the earth. Less than a minute into the fight, the companions took a heavy hit. When Sorta slammed his axe into the ground, it caused a small-scale earthquake, and jagged stone spikes shot up either in a line or around the impact. That would have been manageable with ranged magic, but Sorta's special magic defense was far stronger than the others. Magic resistance level 5. More than half their spells simply didn't affect him, and the few that did barely registered. Then Sorta roared. It was an earth-shattering roar, a double assault of sonic force and spirit. Instantly everyone's vision but Ted's dimmed, and the world began to spin. Hermione, Fleur, and Ron went to their knees. Only Neville recovered quickly and threw himself in front of the others. Ted waved his hand, casting soundwave defenses and spirit isolation on the group, and stepped forward to deal with the main problem personally. Ted dragged Sorta into the mirror space. 30 or 40 meters ahead of the king, he manifested a bronze, 3-meter-long old bull with red eyes and steam streaming from its nostrils. Instinct took over. The Taurine King lowered his head and charged to collide horn to horn. Ted's tactic for dealing with brainless brutes was simple: make them exhaust themselves. Inside the dreamland, he checked the newt he'd trapped earlier. The life parasite card had allowed him to leech more than 10 of the creature's attribute points. It felt exhilarating. The newt was only mildly listless now. Ted could probably strip another 10 or so attributes. He also had a resurrected Faramummy trapped in the ideal land, though he hadn't decided exactly how to use it yet. After Sorta and the rest of the Taurines, there still remained suspicions. Ted checked the spatial anomaly and found something worse than expected. Using a powder made from 3 cat demon claws and 3 goblin bones, he burned the mixture. White smoke spread across the ground and flowed into an invisible crack that opened like a wound in the terrain. Inside was absolute blackness and a putrid stench. Ted felt the magic of death and the stench of the undead. Lots of reanimated, pointy-eared zombies were active inside, and a boss lurked there, the corpse thief. That day was gone as well. There was no point in hurrying on an expense-paid field trip. Ted also discovered mutated magic seeping underground through the forest. If not handled, it would continuously affect living and dead creatures alike. He suggested they enclose that region inside the ideal land, letting the game system consume the corrupted magic over time and preventing any leak back into the world. The French Ministry of Magic and the Abnormality Bureau provided material and labor, building permanent signal towers and containment measures. It took more than a week before the small team could finally leave. When they parted, Fleur hugged Hermione gently. "Hermione, I really don't want to leave you." Hermione smiled. "Only me?" "Of course," Fleur said, and the two girls smiled without saying more. When Ted and his companions returned to Hogwarts, they ran into a fresh problem. Jerry met them with a grim look. "What? Umbridge is the headmistress." Jerry nodded. "Education Decree number 38 went up on the notice board this morning. I was about to call you. Oh, and Professor McGonagall was injured last night and is in the hospital. I don't know exactly what happened." "What exactly is going on?" Ted and the others pressed quickly. "I'm not sure either," Jerry admitted. "Hagrid told me after Umbridge posted that educational decree. She even threatened to fire Hagrid and Trelawney." No one really knew how everything had turned upside down overnight. Ted himself had only heard the news less than an hour earlier. Ron suddenly tugged at his sleeve. Ted looked up to see Umbridge striding toward them, Filch at her side, and a handful of smug Slytherin students following. She looked triumphant, chin high, a tight smile pasted on her face. Up close, her smallness was even more pronounced, short and barrel-bodied, all girth and no height. Today, though, she seemed determined to endure any minor discomfort in order to flaunt her new authority. "Insubordinate students," she purred acidly. "Epiphany, Granger, Longbottom, Weasley. You have been absent from school for over a week without cause. You will be punished." Umbridge's glee was obvious. Ted had long relied on Professor McGonagall's leniency to skip Defense Against the Dark Arts, and Ron and Jerry had followed his lead, showing little respect for her. Now, at last, she could make them pay. "We asked for leave," Ron snapped. "Professor McGonagall sent us on a mission." "Oh, Professor McGonagall." Umbridge's voice was sickly sweet. "I'm afraid she was injured last night and is currently under treatment at St. Mungo's. To facilitate her recovery, in my capacity as headmistress, I have decided to temporarily suspend her duties as deputy headmistress. Your absence does not count." Her face shone with triumph. Power, she thought, should be displayed. After all her years of waiting, she would not squander this moment. "Headmistress? Who appointed you headmistress?" Neville roared suddenly. "Dumbledore is the headmaster. Only he is the headmaster." Neville's tone was fierce and reverent. He had grown into a solid, imposing figure, over 6 feet tall, serious-eyed. For a moment, everyone went quiet. The boy they'd always known had changed. Umbridge's smugness faltered for 2 or 3 seconds, and the seconds felt like a lash across her face. Her cheeks flushed with fury. "I have been appointed headmistress by Minister Fudge," she snapped, voice high and thin with rage. "Headmistress Umbridge, the Ministry of Magic issued the educational decree this morning. If you have any doubts, step closer and read it." Neville's denial had struck a raw nerve. Umbridge wanted to act, to use her office to crush them, but she also remembered how unreliable her own magic was in matches with students and hesitated. Instead, she would assert legal authority and drown them in procedure. But when she finished, Ted only smiled mildly. "Madam Umbridge," he said gently, "we do not intend to insult the ministry, but it should be noted that Hogwarts was founded over 1,000 years ago, while the Ministry of Magic was only established in 1707, less than 300 years ago. Although we respect ministry law, Hogwarts is a magical institution with its own traditions. The headmaster or headmistress must be recognized by the outgoing head. Otherwise, one cannot even enter the head's office, much less exercise its powers. This is an established procedure, just as no one can hold the defense against the dark arts post for a full year. He let the implication hang. Maybe you should speak with Dumbledore? Ted suggested politely. Ted knew Hogwarts almost as well as Dumbledore did, and Umbridge, a former student, knew her school. What he said was true. The knowledge stung more than any insult. Umbridge's face, already red with anger, twisted further. I have been appointed by Minister Fudge, and I am headmistress. I'm expelling you, expelling all of you insolent students. Her voice shook, thinly controlled but unmistakably furious. Ted shrugged and turned to leave. Madam, you have the right to expel me, but you have to go into the head's office and use the quill of acceptance to strike my name from the book of admittance. Otherwise, I remain accepted and protected by this school. Its magic does not respond to mere words or decrees. Strike out my name, take me with you when you go, Ron grinned as he fell into step. Me too, Neville strode off beside them. Me too, Hermione said, chin up. Me too, Jerry chimed. Don't forget me, take me too. Within minutes, 1/3 of the Great Hall had emptied, students following Ted and his friends out. Umbridge stood frozen, humiliated in front of the entire school. When she hadn't been headmistress, they ignored her. Now that she claimed the office, they still didn't take her seriously. She seethed, vowing to teach them a lesson. Ted and his companions had headed straight to Hagrid's hut. Umbridge had already suspended Hagrid and Trelawney, easy targets she could bully to assert authority. She wouldn't dare touch Snape. Some people Francesca had too much sense to pick fights with. Ted knocked on the rough wooden door. Hagrid? Hagrid, are you in? He could hear Hagrid moving inside, snuffling and the clink of a bottle. The big man was a soft touch, brave enough to charge Death Eaters, but when it came to the Ministry's representative, he often wilted. Hagrid took time to compose himself, grabbing a rag to wipe his face before opening the door. Oh, Ted! Neville! Come in, come in! Hagrid cried, letting them into the warm, cluttered hut. Are you drowning your sorrows in mead? Ron asked, making himself at home and seizing a bottle the size of his head. He poured and sniffed appreciatively. Brewed it myself. Few beehives wandered into the forest, you see? Hagrid stammered, eyes still red. Why are your eyes so red? Neville asked. A small stone blew in, Hagrid said without missing a beat. Hermione tried, unsuccessfully, to hide a smile. Don't worry, Hagrid. Umbridge won't be arrogant for long, Ted said. She can't remove you from your post. She can't become headmistress just by saying so. Yes, Dumbledore. Only Dumbledore's headmaster, Hagrid agreed, looking steadier. Ted's voice went grave. What happened to Professor McGonagall? How was she injured? Who did this? Hagrid's face darkened. Ministry folk. Umbridge brought a band of ministry people here last night. She argued with Professor McGonagall, and somebody struck her from behind. They went to see Professor McGonagall at St. Mungo's through the Hogsmeade fireplace. She was alive, but pale, still recovering. Go back to class, she urged quietly. I'll be fine. Avoid that woman for now. Wait for Dumbledore to return. It was an unsettling reminder of how fragile even powerful wizards could be. Spells heal and undo a lot, but a full-strength hit could take a day or more to recover from. Some dark magics left permanent damage. On the walk back, Hermione looked uneasy. Should we avoid Umbridge for a while? That toad's only going to get worse, Ron muttered. Don't worry, Ted told them. Keep a low profile for now. I have some things to follow up on. He didn't return to school with the others. Umbridge's appointment meant little to him. Unless she could legitimately enter the head's office and use the quill of acceptance, she had no real power at Hogwarts. But that didn't explain why she had made the move now. It smelled like fudge. Ted had Parker pull up all recent communications between Umbridge and Fudge. Sure enough, there was a flurry of contact. Fudge telling Umbridge to take over the school and secure it. Fudge himself had been unusually active on the Magic Network, reaching out to several odd accounts with remote coordinates and strange behavior. Those contacts were cautious and met Fudge offline. Someone was orchestrating something big. Why hand Hogwarts over to Umbridge? It made no sense, unless Fudge was desperate or cornered. The minister in this timeline had been acting oddly for some time. Ted needed to know why. Lucius reported what he'd noticed, voice low. Something's odd with the flow of galleons. There's been a lot of movement, large sums, strategic goods being hoarded. Prices are rising. Having spent months hiding and masquerading as a foreign merchant, Lucius had keen instincts for economics. Barty, meanwhile, fed Ted a different piece of the puzzle. Fudge is recruiting loyalists inside the ministry. A small core has already formed. Their meetings are frequent, like they're planning something big. Barty was good at being a double agent and was getting close to Fudge's inner circle, but Ted didn't have months to wait. He found a simpler way: abduct the weakest wizard in Fudge's network, put him under, and invade his memories. As he sifted through the man's mind, Ted hit magical seals that would have stopped most intruders. They were clever protections, but not enough. He broke through them in 10 minutes and watched scenes unfold: Fudge conferring quietly with his cohort, secret meetings, furtive exchanges. Ted's brow tightened. Fudge was doing something that involved Gringotts goblins and the fair folk of the magical world. There were shipments, secret factories, stockpiles. By midnight, Ted had followed the trail into a goblin's memory. A factory. A wand factory? He whispered in disbelief. The fairies are mass-producing wands? Wands were central to a wizard's power. Without one, most wizards were almost powerless. A wand was half a wizard's life. In the original stories, James Potter's death was partly because of the vulnerabilities created when unarmed. For goblins, the situation was stricter. They were forbidden from possessing wands. A goblin caught with a wand risked severe punishment, even death, because wands were the exclusive domain of wizardkind. If goblins were being armed and fairies were helping mass-produce wands, something enormous was being planned, and Fudge was implicated. Ted sat back, the implications crashing over him. If wands were being made and distributed beyond the established orders, everything in the magical world could change in an instant. Thanks to reader Zhongli Maoshan Xiaoshushi for 1,000 points reward. Thanks to Prince007 for 500 points reward. Thanks to Yugo Jusai King for 200 points reward. Thanks to Benren Yidiaochen for 100 points reward. Thank you all.